Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Longhouse. I think we are on episode 31. It's been 30 episodes already, Luddic Path. What do you think?
Yeah, this is pretty good. I feel like we've made it in a sense. We made some progress. We've even had interviews on other channels now. We've been monetized, so
That's
a lot
true.
of lot of
We have been
milestones.
monetized. Of course, the Longhouse
In
is
case you
a
didn't
show
notice,
about art, culture, politics, etc., all with a true right Nordic perspective. Yes, I have been monetized, or this channel has been monetized, so the Longhouse is officially monetized and endorsed by YouTube, which means that from now on we're just going to stop whatever we've been doing and probably move in a more basic direction. Follow the money as it is. We're gonna stop with the deep, hard-hitting topics.
yeah, we've been endorsed by the Norwegian Conservative Party now, and we're gonna start
Yes,
bringing on
which
people
means
from there. And the part of the deal is, of course, that we cut out certain topics. So we're gonna keep a very staunch, conservative profile, but we need to cool it with certain, certain remarks.
cool it with the
Yeah.
anti-Semitic remarks. Yeah. No, but in all seriousness, if you really want to get our attention and you want to support this channel, there should be a super chat feature now for these streams. We do have the subscribe star in the link below, and more importantly, we have the link to the Longhouse Clips channel, which means if you don't have the time or don't enjoy sitting through long live streams, Luddic Path has been doing a great job of basically chopping up highlights from all of the episodes we have going here and posting them on that channel, and they're everything from like a minute to 30 minutes depending on the topic.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out how to chop these things up sometimes. So, I just try my best. I also don't know which episodes people will respond to. I mean, it seems to be quite varied in terms of the feedback you get. The Bronze Age meme video seems to be one of the most popular now, and the Curtis Yarvin, what was that called? The rocket spaceship and you know
Dark Elves and Rocket Ships, yes.
Dark Elves and Rocket Ships seems to also be quite popular, and the Swedish intro with Tucker Carlson for some
Yeah,
reason.
I think that's just because
I have no
Tucker is
clue.
in the thumbnail. I don't get why that is popular. Okay. Nietzsche's Horse asks, any crypto address for donations? Not yet, but there is alternatives in the works, let me put it that way, which I will let you all know once we have that up and running. It'll probably take a little while, but by the end of the year, there should be an alternative for people who don't want to give Susan their money. So, let me bring up our presentation here. Hello, everyone in the chat. I see a lot of people saying the customary, it's not good morning, it's the hello, but it feels like the Twitter, the GM good morning. Everyone's showing up. So we have a lot to cover this time because we were running into a bit of current events, and we also have something that we plan to talk about, which is Robert Cialdini and the concept of influence and his books.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. This is something that goes back to the Shieldings event, actually, where Evelyn did a presentation on propaganda. And I mean, you could hear the summary that we did on the, I think it was Longhouse 30, maybe. We did this Shieldings summary.
Yes.
And I mean, the propaganda talk, as I said, it had a lot of response from the audience in the Q&A the Q&A sessions where people were sort of concerned about the optics and the ethics and so on of propaganda, and that made me kind of think back to other books that I've read on really on sort of a similar topic. That I mean, it's really about soft power, how to apply soft power in different situations, from the interpersonal to the organizational to all the way from the top top-down policy, and having it presented in a way where it sounds fun and ethical and just overall, heckin' wholesome 100. And so I felt like it was sort of due to kind of introduce some of these topics that I think are perhaps a little bit overlooked in these circles, because the type of coverage of the topic of propaganda and governmental messaging, soft power, and so on, it tends to take like this very serious, grim tone, very kind of mid-century German focused, Edward Bernays focused, like this kind of Soviet style speakers and so on. So we'll try to move it away from that into something that's a lot more, let's just say, a lot more optical, and
Right.
but yet retaining the efficiency. But first, of course, we have some news highlights
And
from this week.
specifically in this one, we're taking a bit of a ground level look at, trying to convince someone or persuade someone. I had a bit of a rough time when you introduced me to this. I think it was last week or something, where I went into this sort of with my metapolitics brain turned on. And it's not that it doesn't extrapolate into bigger, more meaningful things, but in the way that Robert Cialdini is writing, it's more interpersonal, one-to-one, or in a sales pitch sort of setting, I feel.
Yeah, it starts out that way, and I think that's the kind of demographic that gets into this type of thing. But if you look a little bit deeper into his writings and the places that he's been employed and so on, a lot of it goes all the way up to government and basically, propaganda, pretty much. I mean, he's been employed by various political campaigns and so on in the United States as a sort of advisor to top level politicians.
Yeah. Anyway, last week in Con Inc. So this is the case of one of Norway's biggest earners, I guess. One of the hallmark rich guys in Norway, so to speak.
This is
moving
like
his residence from Norway to Switzerland as a sort of protest move against increased taxes on wealth, meaning wealth as in not your income, but your property, your boat, your yacht, I should say, etc.
Yeah, and it does tend to sting, if you have like larger industrial operations and so on. Of course, I don't know all of the intricacies about how the wealth tax functions. Just to explain a little bit more on this guy for the people who are not familiar with Norway and Norwegian culture. I mean, in the United States, you have these sort of household name billionaires like Warren Buffett, for instance, or Bill Gates, or Larry Ellison, and so on. And of course, I mean, people like Bill Gates, his name has been a bit more polluted because of his relations to things like the WEF and the stuff that happened with the lockdowns and so on. But in Norway, we also have our let's say like a handful of like household name billionaires, you could say, with this guy being one of them, where it's like this guy, he will show up in the news very frequently. They have an interest in writing about him in the financial newspapers, and also because he has very close ties to like the labor government. He's kind of billed himself as being like this kind of pro labor, pro social democracy guy. And
It's
I think
probably
that's
stemming from his industry, or him getting his start with very core industrial stuff with his company, which then sort of ballooned into more finance later.
Yes, I mean, this guy will be a stream of his own in the future. That's what I'm planning to do. Actually, I'd like to do streams on like extremely rich people and try to do a chronology of their life and the stuff that they've been into and so on. I mean, he got rich off, like you said, into like fishing. Basically, that's his big thing. Very close with the labor government, so that's like one of the reasons why this is such a shock. I mean, it's not just a kind of political fact in Norway. This is someone who has probably by labor supporters been considered to be like our guy. Even though, I mean, if you look closer at it, it's completely.
But he is someone among the other, household rich guys who has been saying that, as a warning if you put the wealth tax too high, I'm going to move my stuff. It's one of those things they will go out every now and then, and there's sort of warn the government that, hey, if you put us up too much, if you put it too high, we'll all be gone, right?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, there's just this standard common sense policy, realpolitik angle to this thing where, you have the concept of the Laffer curve, that there's an optimal level of tax that you can have.
Yes.
And if you go above that, then you lose money, basically. Even though you might get more per person, you're going to lose people. And I mean, with this guy being as close to the Labor government as he is, I'm a little bit surprised that this just happens on their watch. It doesn't make them look good. I mean, people are already complaining about the current Labor, agrarian coalition, but this is another thing that just, it makes them look weak if they can't, try to negotiate with some guy like this, or maybe cut him some special deal as to, okay, just keep him in the country, because there's something about this coming out in the media where he just leaves the country after having been here his entire life, being one of these household name rich people, that it just makes the current government look weak. And of course, because of the human rights, I mean, this is very much a human rights issue, not in the sense of human rights not being abided by, but actually human rights being abided by, especially the clauses around private property and people's ability to move private property, where, I mean, of course, as long as that is there, there's no way to effectively kind of sanction against this type of behavior from these super rich people. And of course, that's what I would have liked to have seen in this case. I've kind of, gone back on, like, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I'd probably say, I'd sound like a lot of these center-right people, where they talk about how, oh, this is great because this is going to teach the government a lesson, and that's going to lessen their taxes and so on. Meaning, of course, that they don't
socialists.
Yeah, that's the kind of idea. But most of the people commenting on this are like, middle class, lower middle class. They do not have any significant wealth tax at all, or any kind of capital gains tax. They just have very high income taxes. Yeah. And this guy doesn't pay any income tax because he doesn't have an income. It's all like capital gains. And so that's where I just don't get this idea that's like, whoa, you'll get it this time. This will put pressure on the government. I mean, if you're
it's one of those things where, technically you're correct in the, as you said, there is an optimal sort of, at some point you're going to drive the rich people away. That's it sounds like one of those Prager University videos from like 2015, right? Which is true, but then you're sort of using that to say, oh yeah, that'll teach you, right? The thing that we didn't want to happen happened. Which is like, okay, but I'd rather it didn't happen, right? Why?
Yeah, it's
why
not
are we letting
good, right? But I don't. When I was thinking about like this segment, I wanted it to have a little bit of a different tone, because I really don't like this guy. And the reason that I kind of chilled out on that is because, I mean, I've been kind of supportive of Donald Trump, and I guess that everything that I would accuse this guy of, you could also accuse Trump of doing.
Sure,
but
yeah.
I mean, so the thing that I would just comment on here is that this guy is just like a black hole of narcissism, right? There's nothing inherently ideological about him in terms of commitment to the social democratic project. I mean, I know this because let's see if I can send you the link here. He had like a rap song commissioned, right? Let's see if I can throw it to you.
I remember that. Oh God,
I'll put it in the private chat here. And like, you have to understand that this is a man who is like 50 plus, who has a rap song commissioned about how awesome he is and how much money he makes. And he had this thing made so he could throw a party and show it to Bill Gates. And he's like 50 plus. Like, this is the type of person that he is, right? Like, this is not even funny. Like Donald Trump, you could at least say that he has like, funny ideas, and he says a lot of funny stuff and knows how to present himself. Like, this is how a 16-year-old boy thinks, and let's take a look at it. You have sound? I think it's muted.
Yeah, I'll unmute it. I'm just checking if there's subtitles. I don't know if is this in English?
Dutch?
No, it's not.
No, it is.
It's in Dutch.
Norwegian. Yeah.
So the Dutch audience can really have a field day with this one. All right, we're just gonna
Han har fått status som en real OG. Kört runt i Lambo back i 89.
Oof. Hang on, I'm gonna skip to... Oh, this really hurts. Do we have to watch all of this?
No, we don't have to watch it, but this is like, yes, somebody commented weapons grade level cringe, and like imagine like this guy Pimp Lotion is sort of big in Norway, like so you pay significant amount of money to have this made, to play it for Bill Gates. Imagine like the fucking narcissism vacuum, like juvenile thinking. It's not even cool. Like
imagine being Bill Gates and having this shown to you.
Oh, listen to this, Bill. Aren't you impressed? But I mean, it's not only that. There's certain other pieces of information that I picked up because I know people who work as like independent contractors with different type of handiwork who have been commissioned to work on his private villa in Oslo. And they basically told me that his entire villa is just like a giant masturbatory monument to himself. Like it's just full of portraits. So he just like has like pictures and statues of himself all around, completely just decadent, luxury stuff. I mean, this is a mentally ill person, basically, who is able to function on some level. And I would ideally like to have seen some warrior caste discipline this guy very hard for doing something like this. But I mean, of course, then, it will be a sort of double standard thing because people will just say like, yeah, well, Trump is a little bit like this. So, I mean, you have to pick and choose your billionaires. Yeah, it's just sort of a fact of life that you end up having these merchant princes and dealing with
the bottom line is that in theory, we shouldn't let this guy get away with this, really. It's going to be, in this specific instance, I want what the socialists want, but I want it in the based form, right?
Yeah, and that's why I told you, I mean, I keep just getting both puzzled and angered by the Norwegian center right. Sitting on Twitter, reading these politicians who, they had to take a break from sucking off Zelensky to suck off this guy, basically, and then throw out some shout outs to feminism and woke culture and then go back to talking about Ukraine and so on. I mean, if you're center right at this point, holy shit, what are you doing? I mean, it's like, I want a sort of sticker commissioned that's going to be in the style. If you've seen the sort of Good Night White Pride stickers, right? The sort of Antifa thing. I want something that's like good Night Center Right, basically with like Andrew Sullivan's face being punched in or him sitting and crying. That's yeah, if somebody can commission that, I'm buying like 20 of them at least. But yeah, I think we spent enough time on this, so we could look at the next news item. Did you have the link for this one?
I did not. I lost it at some point, but I'll see if I can find it.
So you can do some Telegram archaeology and dig this one up, because this is not a big thing. This politician is not a big name in any sense, but he is in our generation a type of millennial labor politician who basically announced that he was quitting politics because of cyberbullying, right? And I don't think I've ever heard about this before. There's probably a lot of cases of people being harassed out of it. Do you have the magic translator? Oh, nice.
There it is. Okay. County mayor says no to re-election after the news. What is the news? I think this is the... this is not news. It's supposed to be like online bullying. So, County Mayor Tarjei Jensen Beck writes on Facebook that he will not stand for re-election. He singles out online hate and incitement as a central cause. It feels like a defeat that I've let the trolls win, that I should let the comment section get to me. I always said the opposite, that the haters won't win, but that's how it feels now. I let them win, he writes. I've let everything that is written get to me, and has sometimes resulted in anxiety attacks. I guess that's panic attacks. If we want to, it's panic attacks. Yes. He was shot and wounded during the terrorist attack on Utøya on 22nd of July 2011 at age 19. He's previously said that he has received messages in which people expressed that they would like him killed. All right.
So I mean,
he's
I
quitting
I looked at
politics.
I looked at his Facebook, right, and that's where a lot of this happens. And like 90% of the bullying is like the same boomer, basically revelation posting on every one of his official Facebook posts, where he just keeps like this boomer keeps babbling on about how like the Utoya, the 22nd July attacks was basically predicted in Revelations in the Bible, right? And it's because they've the Labor Party has not been friendly enough to Israel, and then that's why he's been shot. And it's just like every single thing that he posts, he's
And
just
this
like
is what
standing,
gets to him. This
okay, yeah,
one
this is the new gallery
Israel
opening
boomer.
where we're cutting the ribbons, or
Oof,
we're
yeah.
talking to refugees, and it's like the same fucking boomer in all of the comments. Just keeps like babbling about the sort of like bitch shoot schizo stuff, and like that's enough. So maybe politics is a little bit bottom up. I mean, we should organize cyberbullying campaigns against
Well, I
some of
mean,
these
would
people.
you want this guy to be on the top anyway?
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean,
Really?
certainly not. If you're like this, you're just not cut out for politics. I mean, there is a block button on Facebook, right? You can just remove people from the comment section. It shouldn't
Especially
be,
if you
that
run like
difficult.
a politician page, and you probably have like, it's not like a personal profile. You have a very strong
Yeah.
suit of like blocking stuff.
And it should be formal, right? It shouldn't be personal at all. Like, I mean, now we're just putting that up. The Boomer Waffen Cyberbullying Battalion. Yes. I mean, we keep
Look,
complaining that they're
for,
not accomplishing
for the
anything.
sake of anyone listening in, I mean, obviously, we don't wish violence upon him, and it's sad that he was part of the terror attacks. But if you're going to be a politician, you're going to be, you're going to get Boomer Waffens in your comment section. Just block them,
Yeah, just turn off the screen, bro.
Just turn off the screen, bro.
But seriously, like, it's not a joke. Just turn off the screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Enough on this guy. I think we could, maybe do the last segment on the Sweden Democrats.
Yes, let's look at the Sweden Democrats. So, the Swedes had an election last week, and it got very close. Let me see if I can pull up the results here. From something that is, I'm getting only like far right party in Sweden drives opposition bloc to.
I mean, yeah, if you read the media, you'd think this is the end of the world, basically. I see the same article. The problem is that there's very little actual information to be extracted on this. That's kind of my problem. I can't tell you anything else than Paul Joseph Watson has said. But like, because of
here is better. I found the Wikipedia page. It has like actually percentages.
Nice.
Let's see here. So the result is that the Sweden Democrats got 17.5% of the parliament. The Social Democrats got 28.3%, and the moderates got 19.8%, and the rest was sort of scattered among the lesser ones. The important thing here, let me see if they have this kind of graph. Well, barely, is that with the center and all of this right wing bloc, as it's called, they will be able to eke out a majority, meaning they can form a government. Now, a lot of people online on the right have seen this as a huge win, and far be it from me to sort of keep blackpilling, but this is something I have seen before in this kind of parliamentary politics in my own country, and the result is usually that every other party is willing to do whatever it takes to not have the Sweden Democrats in power.
Well,
now,
that's been the
how
story. For the last 12 years, I think they've been doing everything to keep them out, and of course now they have like doubled their the vote total, so they're a bit more of a force to be reckoned with, and they can throw their weight around a little bit more. But I think most of the people in this sphere should understand that parliamentary politics is not going to solve our problems. This is like having your favorite football team win the match, and we're number one or something, but it's like, it's not really, you're not really doing anything. We're not doing anything. We can enjoy this, and we can associate ourselves with this. But I'm quite cautious in my optimism.
Someone told me to look at the Swedish webpage, but well, this is maybe a bit better to look at. So we'll see how this shakes out in the coming, days. What sort of government is going to be formed out of this? But I read an article by Survive the Jive Brody about a week before the election or something, where he talked about how the Sweden Democrats are pushing the Overton window. And other people are saying that this is a moral victory and that the people are sort of waking up, quote unquote. But I'm afraid that the energy dissipating machine is sort of in full force already. And by the next election, every other party is going to have the same talking points and sort of just kind of absorb the populist energy back into their own.
I mean, if you hear the sentence or some sentence that's contained people waking up, you should just move away immediately. This is I'm sorry to disappoint. Like it's not going to work. There's not going to be some awakening here. Yeah.
I apparently said Survive the Jaya, I meant Guide to Culture.
Is it Guide to Culture or is it Guide to Culture? Because he spells it a little bit differently.
Okay, I thought it was always just been a play on words, sort of. Like when you say it out loud, it's culture, right?
No, well, yeah, there's actually a sort of book I think that's called Guide to Culture.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, I mean, of course, they could. You could form the coalition government here, and they could reduce immigration, and that would be nice. But it doesn't really solve the problem with all this momentum that's going the wrong way, and you still see that in spite of all of the growing unrest and all these civil problems or the problems with crime and so on, that you still have a majority for like the social democrats and people who just want to ignore all these problems and double down on basically climate stuff. I'm seeing the sort of the dialogue here if I go on Facebook or these other news sites. There are just basically two stories. They have the center, the right story that's people are waking up because people have gotten fed up with the crime, and the crime happened because of the migrant wave that came into Sweden and the ghettos and so on, and the politics have been a disaster. People are finally waking up, yada, 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 and this is great. And then you have the left story that is, this is bad because people, the party is connected to Nazis, basically. And that's it. Like, this is basically, this is history repeating itself, and we haven't learned anything.
Sure. I mean, the real test is going to come in 4 years' time when the Swedish people are going to vote again. Are they going to vote even harder on the Sweden Democrats, or are the other parties going to be able to, do something about it, really?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what kind of policies they can actually get enacted, if anything at all. Because, I mean, you've seen what's been happening with these satellite cities in Sweden that are basically ghettoized. I mean, I don't know what kind of like liberal democratic parliamentary solution you could put in place there that's going to marginally improve that if they're not willing to get their hands dirty a little bit. I know that the Danes have had slightly more success with this stuff, but it remains to be seen. So we'll keep an eye on that, and they'll be back on the show real.
Yeah, and they have conceded a lot to get to this point, so it'll be interesting to see what position they're able to get into and what they're able to trade to sort of get that right. As someone said in the chat here, they need to trade a complete immigration halt for whatever the other coalition parties want or refuse to partake in the coalition. So it comes down to the leadership in the Sweden Democrats, what they're willing to sort of hone in on as their core issues and what they're able to push through. But we'll see. For all we know, they're unable to create a government, and you'll get some Frankenstein crazy minority coalition from the left.
Or you just have the bureaucracy running the country, as you have. I think it was Belgium or something, where they couldn't form a coalition government that was stable for like 2 years, and surprise, surprise, like the country just keeps running anyway because the the deep state bureaucracies just run everything. So
Yeah,
it's strange how that works.
strange how that works, and that's also why, you know, okay, you get a minister of, I don't know, foreign affairs or whatever, who handles the immigration in Sweden, and how much is actually going to change in 4 years, you know, unless they have a large mandate in the parliament. It's going to be hard to push through the big ones. But it's an interesting development, and it'll be interesting to pay attention to it the next 4 years, and then see sort of what's going to happen in the next election, because that's going to have to be sort of the confirming vote, right? If people are like, yeah, this is what we actually want.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I think, do we have anything more we want to say on this?
No, I think we're done with the newsreel. We could start diving into the actual meat and potatoes of the presentation.
All right, let's do that.
Learn something about influence. So, I mean, with this one, I wanted to cover both of these books, both Influence and Persuasion by the author Robert Cialdini. Of course, we're only going to cover Influence. It would just be way too massive. It would take way too much time if we're going to cover both. So we might have to do a part 2 if this works out. But of course, the man himself, Robert Cialdini, he's very much a sort of specialist within this particular field. He's not some guy who tries to be a polymath or a Renaissance man and just cover every single topic. He has very much spent his life specializing in this particular field. I mean, I titled
you go
it,
on his Wikipedia page, and it's just, you know, notes on his studies and his books and his PhD thesis. It's all just very hyper focused industry stuff, so to speak.
But I like that. You know, there's very little baggage, and you know that it's good, right? He's not some guy like Sam Harris who will just try to spread out, cover every topic on the planet and not do anything well. They'll just do one thing and do that thing. So, I mean, with Influence, to try to understand why this is important, I try to figure out some kind of metaphor or some way to explain why, you know, looking at these different approaches or these different angles, or what do you call the vectors? He calls them weapons of influence, and he lists 6 different, you know, approaches that you can take to influencing people socially. And you have to understand that this is from a soft power perspective, right? This means getting people to do what you want them to do, and also having them want to do that, like having people actually want to do stuff for you, not influencing people with a gun, not influencing people by just saying that we're gonna, you know, kick you out of your job, or you know, basically hike up your interest rates or something like that. It's very much
coercion in this. Yeah,
very much about you know, trying to put ideas in people's heads that will make them want to do what you want them to do. You know, it relates a little bit to the topic in the last stream where we did Harari, and he talks about the, you know, the hackable human being. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting that he brought this up, and when we're talking about how we end up reaching the same conclusions, or not reaching the same conclusions, but having a similar analysis, is that, you know, his idea about, you know, basically liberal democracy, liberalism, free will being kind of defunct because of the hackable human, quote unquote. I mean, it is basically the ideas that are presented in the book Influence and the book Persuasion plus big data. That's really his argument.
It's very much following in the mode of thinking of the human as a computer, you know.
Yes.
That's been popularized after humans invented the computer, right? And we had a bit of a paradigm shift in the way that we see ourselves.
So, I mean, just to connect the two things that are loosely adjacent to this sphere, I'm going to put I put a link in the private chat there. We could look at the part from Sam Hyde's fight, actually, because I think this is a sort of nice way to explain why these things are important in a way that
I have to wait for the ad.
Ah, shit. Because I think 10 years ago I took some boxing lessons, and there's a couple of things that I took from that. And one of the things is that, okay, you could be a guy that's very strong or very athletic and so on, and The problem is that if you're fighting someone who is actually in shape, who's prepared to fight you, then it's not just enough to try to hit as hard as you can. You need to actually have a setup for getting the punches in, and I think that's something that's very underestimated in our spheres.
Sort of the difference between the art of boxing and winning a fight.
No, well, in the sense that you have people with big ideas, statistics, graphs, powerful arguments, and so on. But
that's what I mean. Like
you could have the powerful punches, but if you don't have any kind of setup for these punches, any way of leading people into them, then it's not going to work as well. Like you're making it difficult for yourself. Are the ads over? Or are still?
Yeah, we're ready. Sorry, I forgot.
Do I had some comments on
No,
on this,
I think it's a nice metaphor. You can't just jump right to the big hook that knocks the opponent down. You have to sort of open them up.
Yes. So now we're going to look at a little bit about the thinking of Robert Cialdini behind some of these openers. So if you flip to the next slide.
Yep, here we go.
So, like to understand, this framework of persuasion, there's sort of two ideas that goes into it to make it very, very simple. The first one is then judgmental heuristics, and the other one is mechanical patterns. Where in the book Influence, he uses the example of the turkey mother with its chicks, and he claims at least that they've done experiments on the turkey where they say that if the turkey mother basically uses the heuristic of the cheeping sound, like the little chirping from the chicks to basically as a signal for whether they are actually hostile or they actually are her chicks in a sense. I mean, for the people who have not heard the term heuristic, it is basically like a rule of thumb. It is some very simple rule that you use instead of doing like a big calculation in your head. You kind of just let's just say that I made this joke previously, like if you're like a loan manager, right, and you work for a bank and you're going to give out housing loans, you could of course take the applicants in and some guy who's asking for a housing loan and say, okay, I'm going to look through your work history, I'm going to look through your credit history and blah 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 blah. Or you could look at the guy and see he shows up and he has tattoos in his face, right, and he has long hair, and just say no. Say no. That's a heuristic.
It's either
right?
Based in previous experience or in some cases, as Cialdini argues, it's hard coded to a certain extent into humans and animals that when A happens, you do B, and it works about 80% of the time, which means that usually that's the right option.
Yeah. So you expand. He leans very much into this evolutionary psychology reasoning for it. I mean, he is a psychologist. So you're not going to get a lot of history or anything. It's more about just like making assumptions about how we got to this point where these rules work as they do. But the heuristic is basically like this extremely low energy rule of thumb thing that will be correct probably more than 80%. Like say like 99.9% of the time, you'll get the correct answer. You don't have to expend any energy. Sure. And that's sort of how, like he explains with the turkey mother, who if the chicks are making the chirping sound, she will be friendly and actually care for them. If they fail to make the cheeping sound, then she will ignore them or be actively hostile towards her own chicks. And they've tried, and this is as robotic, getting to the point where they could introduce a plush toy with like a little radio inside of it who makes like the chirping sounds, and the turkey mother will then start to try to care for this toy, even if the toy resembles like a hostile animal, like the bobcat or some.
I think the bobcat is the example.
No, bobcat. No, that's the like the bobcat. I think that's the the really big one. But there's this other smaller
polecat. He used polecat.
Yeah, not the bobcat. That would be insane. But in terms of the size, but the polecat is like this much smaller animal. And if you could put in a polecat toy with the chirping sound, the turkey mother will then start to interpret the polecat toy as her own child, because she's sort of reliant on this heuristic that in nature will be correct 99% of the time, but because if you are sort of a sophisticated person who is paying attention, you can start to pick up on these heuristics and kind of use these heuristics against the animal. And from here, you basically have, okay, you have the animal will use a heuristic, and when the heuristic will sort of activate the type of mechanical pattern. Either that means, okay, I hear the sound, I'm going to take care of this, I'm going to be friendly, or I hear the sound, I'm going to be hostile, I hear this sound, I'm going to run away, I see this, I'm going to move towards it, and so on. And that's where the hacking comes in. Like, these are sort of something that can be seen as exploits of the biological creatures and so on. And if we then extrapolate this onto the human being, where like you have different heuristics that the human being uses that leads to mechanical patterns, and this is something that can be exploited in regular interactions, whether it just be standard sales situations, political situations, business situations, relationships, and so on. I mean, yeah, I think I sort of explained it.
Yeah, I think
in a reasonable style. So
the basis for his entire book is trying to, well, exploit, I suppose, these heuristics in order to get what you want. But he stresses again and again that this has to be done in an ethical way. And I likened it to going to like a security conference and meeting a white hat hacker who teaches you how to breach a system, but of course always stressing that, use this power for good.
Yes, that's exactly right. You have to be ethical about it, and there's no 100% guarantee that this will work. So it's just like, that's why I use the boxing analogy, because I mean, you could try to set up a punch with like a double jab or a counter punch or something, and you don't have 100% success rate, but it's a lot higher if you actually try to apply some refined technique to your sense of persuasion or trying to influence other people, rather than just like swinging wildly, just asking people, just do what I say, right? Like you see with the with some of these arguments that people have in the DR, which people just flip their shit and tell people, you should just do what I say, or I'm smarter than you, or whatever. I mean, this doesn't work. Like, this is like you throw the haymaker and everybody can just see it, and they're kind of put off by it. So you have to have a way to actually set up getting people to do what you want. So
yeah, and there are some very powerful examples. I have a Twitter account loaded up in case we need it. I'm not sure if we can get away with showing it, but we'll see. Speedrunner says that there's also the essay Taste for Makers by Paul Graham. It's more of a computer geek judgment thing. Maybe I'm going too far literally. Not necessarily, and it overlaps with a lot of with some things I've been thinking about lately, which might happen in the future. Where I want to go back and look at a lot of these early computer hackers, these computer anarchists back in the 70s and early 80s, and look at their predictions and philosophies and see how that maps onto current year, basically. Anyway, do we want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, I think we could just move to the next slide, and I'll start to explain a little bit about the actual approaches. So there are 6 in this book that are covered, 6 sort of angles, 6 weapons of persuasion. The first one is reciprocity. The second is commitment and consistency. The third, social proof. Fourth, liking. The fifth is authority, and the sixth is scarcity. Of course, in the persuasion, he adds more angles, and he will go more into detail. There will, of course, come these cases where there are certain examples of persuasion where these things will overlap a little bit with each other, and it'll be a little bit confusing as to, okay, what rules and what heuristics are being used here, and so on.
Yeah, you can get into a bit of what's the term, Gordian knot, of sort of how these things feed into each other at times.
Yes, and but the book, luckily, it doesn't try to give a comprehensive theory of everything, of how the social interactions work with other people, or how we got here, and so on. It just says, okay, these are the tools. This is like a very clean, efficient explanation of how they work. So, I mean, we'll look at the first one here. So we have to remember again from the previous slide, the heuristic, right? That there is a certain rule of thumb that has to be followed, and a kind of script that has to come from here. So here we have then Xi Jinping and Putin shaking hands. I mean, what is talked about in the book here is that really the idea of reciprocity, I owe you one, the idea that you can do something for somebody else and get something back. Cialdini claims that this is like the cornerstone of human civilization. I mean, if you don't have this, then you don't have civilization, basically. It's sort of impossible. So he claims that this is sort of completely universal, almost all across the globe. There's very few places that are functional in any sense where this will not apply. That
Yeah.
the idea that you will do something for somebody else, and when you do something for them, you give them something, you make a concession, whatever it is, they will feel obliged to do it something back, and
Yep.
if they don't, there will be a large element of shame, and there will be a large element of guilt associated with the people who do not reciprocate. So he will talk about in the book how
and the reciprocation or lack of can even sort of influence further social circles than just the the original two elements. It can go further into sort of family or even small community size affections.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, this it's not just two individuals. It could be, we'll look at some examples, but say one country doing something for another country, or one tribe doing something for another tribe. Or let's say that, I mean, I'll give an example from my own life, right? I was walking back from work one day, and it was snowing, and I met like this kid who was just running around. He was almost crying, and I asked him what the problem was. He said he had lost his cell phone. Like, he had a sort of a smartphone, and he was walking on like this long stretch of road, and he could have lost it anywhere. These large heaps of snow that was quite soft. So, I mean, we ended up just sort of passing each other. But as I walked a little bit further down, I was actually able to spot his phone. And I walked back a little bit to catch up to him, to give him the phone. And of course, that was the end of it. But later, like his father basically came and gave me a sort of champagne bottle and like a box of chocolates. And he offered basically that he would do me favors if I needed to catch a ride somewhere, or he said basically if I needed anything, then
and this is the most important
I should just ask him, right?
Of Cialdini's point here is that usually what you get in return, the reciprocation, is very often worth way more than the initial favor.
Yes, I mean, just we're going to do some pro tips along the way here. The first pro tip here, especially for you Zoomer guys, because I feel like this presentation and this book will be like super useful for Zoomers, because I feel like a lot of this stuff comes natural to the Boomer generation and Boomer guys who will who could sort of intuitively know a lot of this stuff, like say like the Boomer salesman. But for people who are just sort of terminally online, they kind of understand influence through social media and so on. But in terms of like this kind of personal contact stuff, it's a little bit more unfamiliar for them. So pro tip number one is that if you're out drinking with your friends, you just buy your friends a drink. Just start off that way. Just do it.
If you buy the first round, you'll usually end up on top.
Yeah, you will. I mean, you will get more than what you gave back usually. So people will remember it, and they will feel like they're sort of, okay, you bought them one, and they're indebted to you now, so they have to buy you at least the same. Of course, now that we know that, okay, this is a kind of universal rule, there's a heuristic here, and there's a kind of script that follows with you do something to someone and they're indebted to you and they have to give you something back. Of course, then the question is, how do we use this for influence? And then this is the soft power angle here, is that you try to then use favors as a sort of angle of attack, or as a kind of weapon to get what you want. And this is something that will happen, let's say, like with politics, for instance. If you look at lobbying in the United States, where rich people will just give large sums of money to politicians, or they'll buy them tickets to a basketball game. They'll buy them food, drinks, and so on. They might like buy them hookers. I mean, and this is not something that they're doing, that saying that, okay, if I get you this, that I want something specific in return. They will just pamper these people. And because they have that, and because the politician remembers that they've been pampered by this person, then that will basically go into be in the back of their head when they're thinking about legislation, and when they're thinking about making decisions in terms of laws, in terms of spending, and so on. And I mean, there's a reason there's so much of this stuff. There just seems to be more because it works. And it seems to be no stopping it. So you have to ask yourself, if they're spending that much money, they're not doing it for nothing. Like, they're getting their fair share of value back.
Yeah.
Let's see. If you can bring up the quote sheet again, there's this sort of an interesting quote you might want to read about Lyndon B. Johnson. That's sort of directly from the book.
I just tried to bring it up, but it's like in private mode. Do you have?
Let's see if I'll give you the link. Link there. Let's see.
I have the link. It's just I have to log in to open the document. I don't know if you can open it up.
Let's see. Okay. I will try to change the access, and I'll post the link again, see if it works. Is this better?
Yeah, this works. Okay. Do you want the weapons of the...
So it's under reciprocity, and then reciprocity and politics. That's where the quote is.
Here it is. Okay. Let me just bring that up on the screen. Now, do you want me to just read the quote here?
Yeah.
Politics is another arena in which the power of the reciprocity rule shows itself. Reciprocation tactics appear at every level. At the top, elected officials engage in log rolling and the exchange of favors that makes politics the place of strange bedfellows indeed. The out-of-character vote of one of our elected representatives on a bill or measure can often be understood as a favor returned to the bill's sponsor. Political analysts were amazed at Lyndon Johnson's ability to get so many of his programs through Congress during his early administration. Even members of Congress who were thought to be strongly opposed to the proposals were voting for them. Close examination by political scientists has found that the cause not to be so much Johnson's political savvy as the large score of favors he had been able to provide to other legislators during his many years in power in the House and the Senate. As president, he was able to produce a truly remarkable amount of legislation in a short time by calling in those favors. It is interesting that this same process may account for the problems Jimmy Carter had in getting his programs through Congress during his early administration, despite heavy Democratic majorities in both House and Senate. Carter came to the presidency from outside the Capitol Hill establishment. He campaigned on his outside Washington identity, saying that he was indebted to no one there. Much of his legislative difficulty upon arriving may be traced to the fact that no one there was indebted to him. At another level, we can see the recognized strength of the reciprocity rule in the desire of corporations and individuals to provide judicial and legislative officials with gifts and favors, and in the series of the legal restrictions against such gifts and favors. Even with legitimate political contributions, the stockpiling of obligations often underlies the stated purpose of supporting a favored candidate. One look at the list of companies and organizations that contribute to the campaigns of both major candidates in an important election gives evidence of such motives. A skeptic, requiring direct evidence of the quid pro quo expected by political contributors, might look to the remarkably bald-faced admission by Charles H. Keating, Jr., who was later convicted on multiple counts of fraud in his country's savings and loan disaster. Addressing the question of whether a connection existed between the $1.3 million he had contributed to the campaigns of 5 U.S. senators and their subsequent actions on his behalf against federal regulators, he asserted, "I want to say this in the most forceful way I can. I certainly hope so." At the grassroots level, local political organizations have learned that the principal way to keep their candidates in office is to make sure they provide a wide range of little favors to the voters. The ward healers of many cities still operate effectively in this fashion. But ordinary citizens are not alone in trading political support for small personal favors. During the 1992 presidential primary campaign, actress Sally Kellerman was asked why she was lending her name and efforts to the candidacy of Democratic hopeful Jerry Brown. Her reply, 20 years ago, I asked 10 friends to help me move. He was the only one who showed up.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff, and I remember I showed this to you the first time that you seem to take a little bit of issue with it because it seems to be very kind of over focused or in a sense, reductive in a way that it's just going to reduce everything that happens to some degree of persuasion that fits into this model. And then you can just say that like the reason Trump wasn't successful is that he didn't do enough favors for people, which of course is not true. Like there's this entire, ideological structure that was opposing him and so on. But
yeah, there is a level, I'll say, as a critique of the book, as far as I got in it, there is a certain degree of academic navel gazing going on here, but it is a very useful tool in your tool belt.
Yeah, I think if you're going to be, if you're going to compare two politicians with like everything else being equal, and one of them has like a good machine in terms of trying to butter up the opponents, butter up people, and so on, and the other one doesn't do that and just goes straight in on, campaigning on principle or whatever, then I think the gift people are going to win. The people who butter people up. I mean, it's a very it's a very good strategy. I've seen it a lot as well, working in the private sector in IT, where the salespeople that we have employed, all they do is basically just go to parties. They're just given money and they're just sent to visit people in other organizations that are bigger than ours and party with them. They're just like, okay, we'll just take these guys out for a boat trip or go karting or something, go have dinner or go to strip clubs and just make them feel good about themselves. And later that's going to turn into contracts. And it works. I don't know if you have experience with that in business, Walrus.
With what? You cut out for a moment.
No, I cut out. Oh, sorry. No, what I said is that I have experience in the private sector with basically salespeople, right? And if you're doing like business to business sale, it's not walking on doors, knocking, trying to sell vacuum cleaners. It's basically people who work full time partying, right? They just go and take people from larger organizations out to party and go karting or go surfing or something, and go to strip clubs.
That's pretty much once you've been hired somewhere, that's pretty much how the recruitment process goes, right? If you're going to move from one company to another, that's how they get you, right? You go to conferences, etc., and then you basically just party with a bunch of recruiters, right?
Yes. I mean,
and they give you free stuff.
I've taken advantage of this because I read the book, right? I mean, he does explain it in the book that for most people, like for the normie, this is very difficult to do anything about. But I have a very disagreeable personality, so I have just had recruiters buy me like whale sushi and stuff like that, and I just never called them back.
Right, I've been in similar situations. Yes, I mean, it's not very difficult to be aware that that's what they're doing because it's very blatant.
Yes.
But having this sort of in the back of your head really helps. Glow in the Dark says you catch more flies with sugar than vinegar. Actually, you catch even more flies if you use red wine and then put a little bit of soap in it. And that way you catch a lot of flies.
Pro tip
but yes,
number 2.
It's a form of sugar. Yeah. So you're right.
Okay, I mean, we'll go through some of the points that he has under reciprocity, and trying to expand the way you think about reciprocity a little bit to the point where he says that making a concession could be seen as doing a certain person a favor, right? So he gives the example of a Boy Scout that approaches him and basically asks him if he wants to buy tickets to like the local baseball game, and then he says no. And then afterwards, he offers him, well, okay, would you just like to buy some chocolate bars? And then he buys chocolate bars worth of $10. And of course, he doesn't even like chocolate, but in a sense, he felt kind of guilty having said no to the boy who was selling him the baseball tickets. So he felt like he had to buy the chocolate. I mean, he sort of made the boy has like made one concession. He didn't get what he wanted, so okay, I'll just yield on the next one, because him making that concession to me was a kind of favor. And that doesn't sound very intuitive at first, but how this manifests is basically like, say, whether you are in politics or you're working on some type of project, or you are in business and so on. If you're trying to negotiate something that you want, you basically start by asking for something that you think is not going to be approved, like something you think is kind of outlandish, and then basically if they say no to that, then you can ask for the things you really wanted. because now they feel, because they've already said no once, they feel like they have to say yes to the next thing. So you don't ask for what you really want first. You start by making up something that you think is like would be unacceptable, and then the next thing is that you ask for what you actually wanted. An example could be, let's say you're working on some sort of cartoon show. I mean, if you've seen something like Family Guy or South Park or something, if Seth MacFarlane from Family Guy, who will talk to like the network and ask, maybe he will just make up something like, okay, I want to have like a murder scene or something, some kind of like snuff scene in Family Guy that he knows it's kind of, they're going to say no to that. Okay.
Yeah.
But, okay. Well, he said no. Well, then he'll ask for, okay, well, I want to maybe have some swear words in this part that are a little bit on PC and so on. And then, okay, we'll yield to that because the other thing seemed, we've said no once, so we're going to give you half, right? They have this instinct
Speedrunner in the chat beat me to it. It's The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. You ask for 70 and you hedge down to 30. You're still 30 up.
Yes, and I mean, this is something that actually works. I mean, the worst thing that can happen, I mean, you might get no in both cases, but you're much better hedged. And I mean, maybe they even give you the kind of outlandish thing. If you try to do like a salary negotiation or something, you ask for something. Okay, you first ask for like a high sum, and then you go and ask for the sum that you actually want. Which, of course, it's something that people would be worried about in terms of like you would piss people off if you ask for too much. But I mean, he has a lot of parts in the book where he just explains that no, it's actually not the case.
And just to drive the point home, I don't want to derail sort of what you're talking about here, really. But we did talk a bit about a Twitter account. So while you're explaining this, I'm going to be sort of pulling up a couple of images from a Twitter account called This N-Word Trump, which collects tweets off of twitter.com and displays them. And for those of you who feel that this isn't applicable to what we're about, well, you can see how this can influence larger swaths of the population. Sorry, keep going, Luddic, and I'll just share the images
I'm glad you found the Twitter account, because there are so many examples going on currently with this stuff happening in politics.
So just continue your explanation. I'll just let these play in the background, okay?
Okay, yeah, good. So, I mean, you see now, like, probably what's being displayed here with the COVID checks, for instance. Trump sending out checks to people with his name and face on, giving people, let's say, like $1,000. This is something that people remember. They feel indebted to Trump. And I do kind of suspect that that's part of the reason why Trump got like a higher, black vote than any previous Republican candidate, is because he just directly gave them gifts. It's something you don't typically see. I mean, now with Joe Biden, you're seeing the student loan forgiveness stuff. That's also just another kind of sort of style of reciprocity, where he's just giving people a gift in exchange for a vote. And it'll be interesting to see how... Sorry, I can't concentrate. This is just too funny.
I can keep them for later, but I think they're the most effective when they're just in the background.
just keep showing a couple. So I'll try to finish up on the reciprocity here. So the question is then, okay, another pro tip: how do you take advantage of this aside from the tips that we've given? Let's say if you do something, right? If you do something for somebody else, you help them move their couch, or you finish their homework on time or something, and they're saying something like, "Oh, thank you, I owe you one." And your instinct might be to say, "Oh, don't worry about it. It was nothing." No. You don't say that. You say, you would have done the same for me, right? This is what you're going to say every time from now on. After you've seen this presentation, you're just going to say, every time you do someone a favor, you're just going to say, "You would have done the same for me," and then they will. So
tenfold.
Yeah, tenfold. Let's see some other pointers here. If you're going to give people gifts, it's usually better to give people something personalized than something standardized, because what he says in the chapter, in the sort of self-defense section, how do you defend yourself against it, is really you can defend yourself against it by refusing, right? This is a typical thing, that people will refuse favors, or say like a woman who doesn't, you'll try to buy her a drink and she's not accepting because she feels like that makes her indebted to you. You could refuse, although that will create a sort of bad mood and bad associations for later, or you could try to reframe it in your mind to the point where you're thinking about it as this is not a favor. Like, this is basically a strategic attempt to make me do something, and refusing this is not really, I'm not refusing a favor in good faith. I'm actually just refusing a sort of influence attempt.
Yes.
But
I
yeah, I
think
think
it's
that
time,
covers.
That covers it. I'm going to stop sharing images now and go back to
I love it. I love it. Okay, let's flip the slides and see what the next one is.
Commitment and consistency.
Yeah, I mean, in this chapter, he basically, the subtitle is like commitment and consistency, the hobgoblin of the mind, right? This is another thing that he sees as this. Okay, what do you need to have a civilization? You need to have reciprocity where people are giving back. If they're if they've gotten a favor, they'll give the favor back. But you also need the idea of people committing to things and having shame associated with low commitment. Basically, let's say if somebody says that they're going to from now on I'm going to marry someone, right? I'm going to marry Susan. And if you get divorced from Susan, say 1 month after, you're seen as a significantly lower value person, right? Because you have a low consistency and low commitment.
There is a sense of underlying social pressure in not staying consistent.
Certainly, and
but against
it's even
not staying consistent. Sorry.
Oh yeah, and I mean, the more public you are about your commitments, then the worse it gets, right? I mean, if you let's say, marriage is one of these things where, I mean, you actually are standing in front of a lot of people and you're saying I do, and do you accept these vows? I do, right? So that makes it worse. It's the same thing like with people who,
I mean, that's the whole point. It's very core to the human experience, right? If a marriage happens in the woods and no one's around to see it, did it happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. The problem with this, and the reason I included Jeb Bush, or I could have included any of these Con Inc. type, is that this is one of the kind of easier things to abuse in terms of influence, especially from people who are on the right or who are conservative, because you have the idea that they're committed to principles, right? They're committed to certain values, and when they're committed to these values, it's very easy to kind of just hold that against them in cases where it would be beneficial for them to do something else. And you're seeing this a lot in the rhetoric, like say, like with the 2020 election, like, do you commit to a peaceful transfer of power? Like, will you commit to, or something like, will you disavow, this group, or will you disavow that group? And they do you do that to make you say that publicly?
You're not a racist, are you?
Yeah. So when you've said that publicly, then you have to carry that forward. Basically. I mean, and this goes like a very, very long way in terms of explaining things. Like we talked about on, let's say, the George Soros stream, where we talked about the idea of like the positive feedback loop, where if people are presented with evidence contrary to beliefs they have, they will just believe them stronger. And I mean, this feeds into the idea of consistency, is that you have a certain belief. Let's say you believe that printing money will not cause inflation, and you're seeing evidence to the contrary. You're just going to come up with some other explanation as to why this is happening, right? And that's what you're seeing with most people. That's that they're just kind of doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down on the same idea. And a lot of that has to do with the fear of being seen as unserious. They've gone out and sort of committed to a specific idea. When they commit to that idea, they're afraid of the shaming. In a sense, they're sort of internally policing themselves to stick to that idea. And it's better to kind of be absurd and consistent than to be inconsistent and in accordance with reality, in a sense.
But it's also important to note that there's this sort of, it's not just outward social pressure either. It's this weird sort of feature of the human psyche that sort of makes you do it as well. It's a combination of both.
Yes. And this is where stuff like the sunk cost fallacy comes in, where I mean, let's say you've started on a project and you learn something that basically implies that the project can't be completed, or what you're trying to do is impossible. But you're basically going to keep doing it. You keep running until the wheels fall off because you want to appear consistent. So how this is sort of applied in actual sales situations, for example, is the idea of you know, he has like this model of doing sales that's explained in the book, where let's say a salesperson will call you on the phone and ask you, how are you doing? And you say, I'm doing well. Okay. Well, then that means you've said something publicly. You sort of said, you've committed to the fact that you're doing well. And then maybe they'll ask you, well, what do you do? You know, what's your job? And then you'll answer, you know, I'm a computer programmer. Okay. So you've established two things. You're doing well. You have to be consistent with that. And
that's a very unrelatable job you chose for most of my audience.
Yeah, I think so. Sorry, you're just gonna have to imagine.
Imagine you're a computer programmer. Yeah.
Okay, so they basically know you're doing well, and you have and you have like a job that pays decently. You have like a decent middle class income. You know, you're not struggling to make ends meet. And then they'll ask you, you know, do you want to make the world better? Do you want to help people in the difficult situation? Right. So you've basically said you're doing well. You have surplus money, and then they ask you if you want to help people who are doing badly. So are you going to say no? No, you're not going to say no. You're going to say going to say yes. And now they have you, like they've got you in this sort of step ladder of questions.
And you have to be an evil person now to hang up, right?
Yeah. Now you're basically conceding to being evil if you're doing this. And so then they're basically, okay, well, do you want to subscribe to a membership of UNICEF or something and pay like $50 a month? Yeah, of course you're going to say yes, because especially if there are other people around you, right? Because you need to remain consistent.
My way of getting out of that is, regardless of it being true or not, is to say that I'm already donating to another charity, and then sort of just having a roulette of which charity it is, depending on which one I'm talking to.
I have some other strategies.
I have had charities in the past that I have, you know, donated to that I feel do actually good work, not just shoveling, you know, money to insert African country here for some warlord to steal. But that's besides the point. It's an easy way out. Is the bottom line.
If you're married, that's the easy way out to say, I need to consult the wife, basically, because she might be against it. Of course, if you're not married, you can just lie about it and say that you need to consult the wife. Otherwise, you can just pretend to have a heart.
That means you have to sort of like publicly, you know, cuck yourself.
Yes. So there's no easy ways out of this one once you get to this point. So you either have to stop it from happening, or just kind of recognize that, okay, this is what's going on. Of course, this is something that sounds kind of innocuous, right? It's just like this kind of sales thing, this sort of step ladder that they go through. But there are many applications of this throughout history. So if you want to bring up the quote sheet again, if you read the quote that is under commitment and consistency, and the header is called brainwashing, there's a kind of interesting tidbit of information there about how this is used in wartime situations. See, yeah, you found it. I think you're still muted.
Oh, sorry. I'll start again. Let's see. During the Korean War, many captured American soldiers found themselves in POW camps run by the Chinese communists. It became clear early in the conflict that the Chinese treated captives quite differently than did their allies, the North Koreans, who favored savagery and harsh punishment to gain compliance. Specifically, avoiding the appearance of brutality, the Red Chinese engaged in what they termed their lenient policy, which was in reality a concerted and sophisticated psychological assault on their captives. After the war, American psychologists questioned the returning prisoners intensely to determine what had occurred. The intensive psychological investigation took place in part because of the unsettling success of some of the aspects of the Chinese program. For example, the Chinese were very effective in getting Americans to inform one another, in striking contrast to the behavior of American POWs. Inform on one another, in striking contrast to the behavior of American POWs in World War II. For this reason, among others, escape plans were quickly uncovered and the escape attempts themselves almost always unsuccessful. Sorry, I'm slightly under the weather if my voice is a bit weird. When an escape did occur, wrote Dr. Egdar Schein, a principal American investigator of the Chinese indoctrination program in Korea, the Chinese usually recovered the man easily by offering a bag of rice to anyone turning him in. In fact, nearly all American prisoners in the Chinese camps are said to have collaborated with the enemy in one form or another. An examination of the Chinese prison camp program shows that its personnel relied heavily on commitment and consistency pressures to gain the desired compliance from prisoners. Now, can I take an aside here in the middle of the quote?
Go ahead.
Because I've been thinking about something for a while, and it really came to a head during the recent, was it a cigar stream yesterday, where Academic Agent and Paul Fahrenheit debated basically Americanisms.
Is America Doomed? Is that the one? Yeah.
Yes. I don't think it was a cigar stream. I think it's just, that was the name of the stream. I don't think it was scheduled. And that's the idea that Americans and the Europeans are so fundamentally different in their sort of core because of the people who actually went over there, that this crabs in a bucket mentality that let the Chinese sort of play on this, and the reason why Americans need a book on how to rediscover Christian morality leads to this sort of behavior. I don't know. It's just a feeling that I have reading this. And I remember when I heard this in the audiobook form, I thought, well, is this a problem with humans in general? Is this a specific American thing? I don't know the answer. It's just a thought.
It's a good question.
Okay, continuing. Of course, the first problem facing the Chinese was how to get any collaboration at all from the Americans. These were the men who were trained to provide nothing but name, rank, and serial number. Short of physical brutalization, how could the captors hope to get such men to give military information, turn in fellow prisoners, or publicly denounce their country? The Chinese answer was elementary. Start small and build. For instance, prisoners were frequently asked to make statements so mildly anti-American or pro-communist as to seem inconsequential. The United States is not perfect. In a communist country, unemployment is not a problem. But once these minor requests were complied with, the men found themselves pushed to submit to related, yet more substantive requests. A man who had just agreed with his Chinese interrogator that the United States is not perfect might then be asked to indicate some of the ways in which he thought this was the case. Once he had so explained himself, he might be asked to make a list of these problems with America and sign his name to it. Later, he might be asked to read his list in a discussion group with other prisoners. After all, it's what you really believe, isn't it? Still later, he might be asked to write an essay expanding on his list and discussing these problems in greater detail. These Chinese might then use his name and his essay in an anti-American radio broadcast beamed not only to the entire camp, but to the other POW camps in North Korea, as well as to American forces in South Korea. Suddenly, he would find himself a collaborator, having given aid to the enemy. Aware that he had written the essay without any strong threats or coercion, many times a man would change his image of himself to be consistent with the deed and with the new collaborator label, often resulting in even more extensive acts of collaboration. Thus, while, quote, only a few men were able to avoid collaboration altogether, end quote, according to Dr. Schein, the majority collaborated at one time or another by doing things which seemed to them trivial, but which the Chinese were able to turn to their own advantage. This was particularly effective in eliciting confessions, self-criticism, and information during interrogation.
So it's really insidious stuff.
Sorry, it's very insidious. And, I don't want to damn all Americans with my comments earlier. I was just, it was just sort of like an aside with the question of would the sort of European soul, or let's say the Japanese who have a tendency of just suiciding, which the meme goes when being taken prisoners, is there a sort of aristocratic soul that would be able to resist this?
Yeah,
but that's beside the point.
You have certain people, I think, who will always be able to resist it. You could train people, of course, to understand what's going on here and then resist it. But I think for someone who doesn't know about this, if you've never been exposed to this before,
and you're a GI or a grunt, right?
This is going to be quite effective. I mean, there's a lot of these, how the Austrian painter quote about the masses being feminine, and there's a lot of when you look at you look at a lot of these things that we're going through here, you can kind of see the mechanisms of why that happens. There's just so many kind of underlying mechanisms that lead into the mass man, or the kind of mass mind that is sort of indecisive, that needs to be led and so on, that has all of this baggage, all these heuristics and automatic mechanisms that, especially in kind of like when you extrapolate it from the individual to the group, leads to a lot of this strange behavior that can be manipulated. So I mean, there are sort of other points that's being brought up, say like hazing rituals is one, where it's not so common where we're from, but you have like a lot of these let's say some of these movies like about American colleges, like American Pie, and these movies that entail these experiences that young men have in joining these fraternities, where they put through these rituals and they have to eat stuff that's disgusting, or do like strange sexual things, perhaps walk around naked in the cold, perhaps be beaten and so on. And this is the sort of thing that it really works into the commitment and consistency angle when you've exposed yourself to this and put yourself through some of this stuff in front of other people. You've shown a lot of commitment and consistency, and that will drive you in a powerful way to stay sort of within these fraternities, right? There's something there that can't just be copied by just asking somebody nicely. I mean, making somebody actually commit in front of other people, it adds an entire new element of power into the sort of compliance process.
And it's very hard to realize it before you're already sitting in the trap. It's one of those things that can really sort of insidiously and quietly creep in, and before you know it, it's too late, right?
Yeah, that's the thing about these things, is that it is true soft power. I mean, you're doing it because you feel like you're doing it out of your own free will, but what's happening is that you're actually just locking yourself into a certain trap.
Yeah.
So I mean, they bring in this sort of quote here that's like from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's that the consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, right? The idea that you have to stay consistent to certain ideologies and so on. I mean, it makes me think about, say, like classic libertarians, for instance, or ANCAPs. I mean, I'm sorry to keep like bashing on them, but
dunking on the libertarians.
It's that I feel like they really have this kind of like consistency mentality, that they have to remain consistent to their ideology at all costs.
The allure of the libertarian mindset is a framework that you can sort of re-employ to everything, right?
Yes. So the defense angle is that basically, I mean, when you know about it, you can recognize it and then try to move yourself out of it. Because I mean, if you're not aware of this as the kind of thing that you're doing, then defending against it is almost impossible, right? So
exactly.
And it's not something to be ashamed of either. I mean, this is sort of the cornerstone of having like a good high trust society, that people want to be consistent and they want to be committed. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that can be exploited, particularly with people who are gullible and well-meaning. And that's why I put the Jeb Bush in there. That's why we keep.
And it's why Cialdini himself often stresses that you have to do this in an ethical way, quote unquote, because the potential here is to ruin sort of relationships. And that sounds very dramatic, but if you start employing this to get whatever you want, you're probably going to get looked upon as like a psychopath by your friends, right?
Yeah, especially if it becomes overt. Like, you have to be very careful in how you angle this and how you use it. You can't use it all the time. Like, you have to pull it out on occasion, because it is like fishing with dynamite. I mean, eventually there's no fish left in the pond, right? Because you've destroyed it. It's a bit of the same problem that you have, like, say, with pickup artists and so on, is that they use a lot of this, trickery like this, but people adapt eventually. If you overuse,
it works like maybe 2 times tricks on the same person, and then you have to find someone else, right?
Yeah, you have to keep inventing new tricks and upping the meta, as they call it. Right, but I think we're
you call it the meta.
I think
circles?
So too. They talk about like the meta of
like video games,
gaming.
Love it.
Okay, we can keep flipping onto the next one. So we're going to look at social proof. We have Mr. Dan Bilzerian here. I don't know what he's doing currently. Last time I heard, he was just going down in flames with
I was
all of
going to
these
say,
lawsuits and his debts.
didn't he have to go to jail or something?
Yeah, maybe he has. I don't know if anybody in the
Or was
chat
that
can
just his
fill us
dad?
in.
I don't quite remember.
I know his dad was in jail, but I think he got a lot of his money from his dad and borrowed a lot of money to sort of sell himself as an influencer
And buy all of these girls, of course.
Yes. I mean, it doesn't matter how like cool and attractive you are. You don't get this kind of harem like with naturally. You have to pay them to do this stuff. So
Or command them.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course
if you
could.
manage to set society up that way.
Going back, return to tradition.
Yes. Return, yeah, with the V.
Based polyamory. We have to... No,
all
but
right. Enough
I mean,
jokes.
This is quite a powerful angle. Basically, okay, we go back to the basics here. What's the heuristic? The heuristic is that if other people like it, then it's good, right? It's really that simple. If other people like it, then it's good, and then I should do it too. So instead of actually doing the work as requires a lot of calculation, investigation, and time, you can just see that people, let's say everyone I know is using this insurance company, and nobody I know is using that insurance company. So I'm going to go with this one because it looks like it's more popular, or whether it's this applies with people as well. Like, I mean, as you're seeing with Dan here, when you're seeing him with all these sort of women, that is kind of his social proof in a sense. Like, he's been selected by all of these women.
Yeah, he's got to be doing something right. Yeah.
I think women are like particularly bad with this stuff because I mean, for me, it's like this is one of the most powerful.
Well, bad or good. I mean, they're one of the most effective. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, at least the most effective ways to compel women to do stuff. It's just to convince them that other women are doing the same thing. I feel like that's like almost their entire MO of how they operate. So, like for this is something. If there's a pro tip, something I just recommend for people who are, if you're trying to meet women, I'm not just gonna go into this pick up. I mean, I watched the Red Hawk Distributist recently. I'm not going to try to advocate pickup artistry or anything like that. But eventually, you're going to have to meet other people, right? And sometimes it's hard if you're by yourself. Right? It's really difficult if you're showing up to a club or some social event and you're all alone. So bring some friends. Just bring somebody who has pre-selected you to make it look like you're not just like the standalone weirdo, and that can sort of clue other people into the fact that you're worth talking to. So there's some examples that he goes through in the book. Let's say like the canned laughter in comedies, for instance, which is something that something that works, even though I find it quite annoying. But even though people know that this is canned laughter, they know that it's completely fake and manufactured. It's still more effective than not doing it in most of the cases, right? Even though it does sort of get exhausted, like the cultural zeitgeist.
He talks about the roots of this, which I found interesting, which I didn't know actually was the French used it in theaters. They would like sell themselves as plants in the audience to clap at the appropriate moments or yell, bravo or things like that, to sort of increase the average attendance opinion of the play.
Yeah, I mean,
or the opera, or
it
the
works.
whatever.
It's like the psyops are really old.
The psyops go a long way back, yes.
So I mean, in the future, I plan to maybe do like I talked about, having a stream on Røkke and some of these other household names in terms of the Norwegian culture and the household rich people. And Petter Stordalen, you're probably familiar with. He's
Yep.
He's probably one of the most like famous rich self-made billionaires in Norway. Who's a sort of hotelier, like real estate guy. And I read his biography, basically. I mean, of course, a lot of his, I assume, is embellished, but he has a lot of the same ways of thinking as Trump has, but I think he's a lot more sophisticated in his ability to communicate it, in a sense, and how creatively he applies it. When he was talking about, like, when he was taking over, trying to build new shopping malls and hotels, he would always ask his staff to park in front. Like, he would ask the staff to park on the customer's parking lot instead of the staff parking lot, to make it look like they had customers before they had customers.
Yeah.
I mean, he talks about like when he was offered a manager job at 24 at like one of these new, like one of Norway's biggest shopping malls. He basically would, not pay people. He would ask people to sit and call into his office that were like people in his family who would constantly like put on fake accents to call into his office through. I mean, this was in the, long ago, right? So they didn't have regular cell phones or they had like switchboards where there would be women operating the switchboards that would just bring the phone call into from the building into his office. And this was basically so to create social proof. Create the illusion, create social proof to the women operating the switchboards, and that would have like this kind of cascading effect of the women operating the switchboard kind of having the impression that he was like this really important guy that people had pre-selected and so on. Let's see. I mean, you see it with social media. I guess it would be another thing that's more familiar to people. You look at likes, for instance, on a YouTube video, or you likes, dislikes ratios on Twitter and so on. I mean, what is that?
Remember to like this video, by the way.
Other than social proof. I mean, you use that to sort of gauge who's worth engaging with and who's not worth engaging with, which is something that's different, in this iteration of the internet than previously. I think this is something that Charlemagne noted in one of his videos, that in the sort of Web 1.0, you searched on Google and you just found forum posts.
Yeah.
And you just read the forum post and it's sort of take it or leave it, right? You have to look at it on its
someone
merits.
like put this out there, and the only thing that verifies it is whoever posts below him, right?
Yeah.
Calls him a retard.
And now it's basically, more democratized in a sense that you have the upvote system or the like system, and social proof is everywhere. Like, it's very prevailing on the internet in terms of reviews. And this is something that, it can be very easily faked. In a sense, you just, like you said, you just pay people to do this for you. And even if you think this is like all of the principles on the list here, if you think you're immune, you're wrong. Basically, even if you know that this is a trick, you're still prone to fall for it, right? So that's the that's the interesting part. He talks about the story of Kitty Genovese, which I don't know if you're familiar with. It's like the woman who was sort of murdered in front of like thousands of people in New York, where
I didn't realize that was the name until he talked about it, but I did, like, it rung a bell when I encountered it in the book that, oh yeah, it's this story, right?
Yes. And I mean, he basically says, I mean, if you look at the media headlines, then it's all about, how city life makes people cold, and, people have become so cruel in modernity and so on. I mean, this was even in, if you read Watchmen, right? I think the character Rorschach is like one of these more hardcore vigilantes. He has like a monologue about the Kitty Genovese story as like his motivation for doing what he does. But like Cialdini basically explains it as, like, this is not about people being evil, but it's more about mass psychology, where in that case, like, there's no one to guide the feminine mass, in a sense. Like, nobody knew what they were supposed to be doing. In this case, everybody was just paralyzed, because if one person is just standing there looking on, then the next person is just going to come and stand and look on as well. So there's no one really setting an example as to what they're supposed to do, and that puts the crowd in a sort of paralysis, in a sense, because everybody is just using everybody else to orient themselves on what they should be doing. And because most people are not doing anything, then that means everybody else is not doing anything, if that makes any sense. So it's like this very compounding effect of paralysis of the crowd.
The bystander effect.
Yes. And that's, I mean, at least in Cialdini's mind, it kind of goes under the idea of social proof, where it has the same underlying mechanic. Then he brings up like the Jonestown suicide, drinking the Kool-Aid, in a sense. I mean, this is both a case of the social proof, in the sense that I drink the Kool-Aid because everybody else is drinking the Kool-Aid. But he also brings in, he circles back to reciprocity, where he mentioned that the cult leader was very good at making people indebted to him by using favors, in a sense. And the people who got out of it without drinking the Kool-Aid had basically been insistent on not accepting favors from him, because they thought he was fishy and so on. So he argues that maybe if they had accepted it, they would be more inclined to actually drink the Kool-Aid and kill themselves.
Yeah.
Right. I think I don't have that much more to say on social proof. Do you have anything you wanted to close?
No, I think social proof is one of those things that are very apparent. You know, we it's a very very overt part of of human society.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people are aware of how it works, but it's important to sort of try to catch yourself when you're being influenced by it.
Catch yourself when you're being influenced by it, and if you want to be really smooth, try to have this in the back of your head when you're interacting with people socially, right? Because it's influencing you, it's also influencing other people. So when you try to approach situations, you know, how am I approaching this in terms of social proof? Am I just walking up to people like a total weirdo, right? I think you have.
And I know it's cool to be a base, you know, right-wing schizo online, but when you go outside, people don't really gravitate towards that. You need to have some friends.
Yeah, I think you mentioned on the Cialdini's event we did, where you were just approached by some lone guy who said that he liked whale meat or something, and of course this is
no,
something
I think
that
he had no, he didn't. I was talking to someone else and he came over. Yeah, that's true.
But that's the sort of thing with like social proof, is that if you come over just as a kind of lone person, it's it makes
way
people
harder.
Suspicious usually, right? And it makes it really difficult. So keep it in mind. Okay, now we can look at the next.
You know, unconsciously, I suppose, pulled on it when I talked to someone else, right? Because I did approach them as a single person, but the way I approached them incorporated you guys, right? I said that the reason I was here was to meet with you guys, right? To make sure that I'm not just some weird guy who showed up alone, right?
Exactly.
So
okay, but then we can look at the next angle of persuasion. It's called it's just called liking, and of course this sounds like the most kind of trivial, of course, moment that you can imagine. But
people are shit posting about whale meat in the chat. Whale meat is actually good. It was just this specific instance of this person, you know, talking to me. That was the hyper focus of the conversation.
Yeah, he I think he knew you were Norwegian, so he used it as a sort of an opener, right?
Yeah, he did.
But I think because he was by himself, then it comes across as maybe a little bit more weird than that.
Yeah,
I mean, I talked to him later.
I don't want to, you know, I don't want to talk shit about friends.
I'm not gonna, I'm not mentioning any names, or this could be like anybody, right? But I did talk to the guy. We had a great conversation. And so on, but it's just a sort of an example of what could potentially be off-putting to someone, like if you're not mindful of this kind of social proof angle, right? But yeah, liking, we have the picture here that we used in the Finland stream. That's surprisingly one of our more popular streams on the Longhouse. I think it's because of the pretty ladies in the thumbnail, but you seem to claim that you saw something else on the analytics, that it's actually coming from some other site. Maybe the Finns are sharing this.
Maybe I would have to pull up the analytics again to. Let me see if I can find the Finland stream here.
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit. It's not of great importance to this, but the picture here is then of Finnish Prime Minister and Urho Kekkonen and Khrushchev basically having a BFF moment, which is, I mean, you know, people are influenced by people they like. People will do stuff with people they like, and if they don't like you, then they will not do stuff with you. That sounds like the most obvious thing, but we can break this down into, okay, what makes people like someone. The first point that he brings up is physical attractiveness, right? If somebody's good looking, you like them, and you're not immune to this, right? Nobody's immune to this. There's a lot of studies been done. I mean, you could Google stuff like the halo effect, where people will attribute positive characteristics to people who are good looking, whether it would be intentions, like if they make a mistake, they do something wrong, it's been, you know, it will be attributed to them as a mistake or as a misunderstanding. Let's say if you're just like a really ugly person, then people will interpret the mistake as being malicious, right? This is very typical. I think most people have experienced that on some level, that there are different leagues of people and different ways they're being treated based on how they look.
Don't be unattractive, right?
What's that meme? That's how to pick up a woman in the office or something, and it's like
it's the remember the rules and the HR stuff.
Be attractive. That's the rule. And of course it sounds like it's just kind of stupid. I don't want to lean into that sort of incel angle where they talk about, you know, being height pilled or age pilled or whatever, but there are things that you can
play
do.
A role.
You know, if you are well groomed, right, it does help.
That
if you're in shape, that does help. If you have good posture and so on, there are certain things that you can do to optimize a little bit in terms of the influence you have on other people. If you smell good, that helps, right? You're just more likely, if you are pleasant, to influence people. So again,
I will add real quick. I pulled up the analytics for the Finland stream real quick, just because I was interested, and apparently there's a lot of people coming from Google and Telegram and Discord and Gab on that specific video, and I don't know why.
So there's some based Finnish.
Someone
Discord.
shared it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, thank you, and hit us up on the Longhouse matrix in the description if you want to hang out in an even more based channel.
Yes. So another thing that induces liking is, of course, similarity. I mean, you can see with the boys here, you got two grown men. They're both bald. They have like the same suits on, and they both work in politics. They probably have like similar families and so on. I mean, this is something that you like people who are similar to you. This is, of course, not another thing that's not shocking, but I mean, it might seem a little counterintuitive if you're growing up in the global homo era, where it's all about the inner being, in a sense that, and adults might not be completely honest with you about this. That the fact that if you dress like other people and you act like them and you talk like them, they will like you better. They just will. It doesn't matter like how you express your inner dream child or something. It's just going to be off-putting to them if you are too different. So the dress style is probably one of the first things he points to, is that you dress as other people do. They feel safe with you. They feel familiar and so on. The other thing is then interests. That it's sort of a typical sales strategy where let's say somebody is trying to sell you a car, and they will look at the markers or something, that maybe you have a t-shirt with Liverpool on it, and they'll start talking about football with you. Or they see maybe you have like a Linux tie or something, and they'll try to talk about operating systems, or they'll try to find any hook that they can use to make them think that you are like them, and from that angle they will try to sell you something or influence you. And like, usually I like to think of myself as being sort of immune to this stuff because I have to hide my power level so much. But I was actually sold on to a sort of investing course by a salesman over the phone, who was somehow able to pick up that I am like right wing of disposition. I mean, like, it sounds like a complete joke, but he was talking to me
I
about,
can see. I mean, that's why when you meet a good salesman, you kind of have to applaud it, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I just, still applause. I felt like I overpaid for that course. It wasn't like insane. I didn't borrow money or anything. I felt like it wasn't the total value of it, but he was selling me on the fact that, if you use like these regular resources for real estate contracts, it's going to have like this kind of leftist slant because of the labor government. And, a lot of that union stuff is going to be backed in there. But we have like the real, right-wing contracts and the real kind of right-wing methodologies. This was bullshit. They did not have any of that stuff. But he sold me in on that. Like, that's the reason that I think I signed on and like paid the price for that course. So, I mean, again, applause. He's the only guy that's figured that out, by the way, who I've talked to. Because I've been in other situations, whether it's been like with negotiating salary or with employment situations or sales or something, and they will always pick the wrong thing to try to.
He's probably realized that whenever I call these like white men over a certain age, 80% of the time they're going to jibe with conservative values. If it's a woman, I'm going to go the lefty route. This guy's probably making bank being a salesman.
I mean, yeah, he is. I think that's but it is a risk. Like, you could end up striking out.
I mean, but that's why it's a heuristic, right? In sales, it's not about the one sale. It's about, the 100 calls and what's your hit rate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the opposite expression where I've sort of declined job offers because he was trying to sell me on electric cars, that I was sort of an electric car guy, and I was just kind of turned off by it. I was just a lot of these things where it's either football or that I'm into electric cars, as you said, or some video game that I don't give a shit about. So it's a bit of hit or miss there. But if you know what you're looking for, this really works. Just try to focus on what you have in common with other people. Emphasize that. If you emphasize that, then it's easier to influence them. Let's say contact and cooperation is another thing. I mean, you like people that you're around, right? It's just the more you're around them, the more you like them, and of course, assuming that you have like a regular relationship. If you're around them in a sort of competitive situation, then it's different, right? Because it's more associated with negative emotions, and the same thing goes for this sort of the idea of conditioning. In a sense, he talks about the idea that don't kill the messenger. Like, where does that idea come from? It's from like with these imperial messengers that are they have to bring bad news, right? And because
Persians,
people,
I think.
people sort of associate. Like, I mean, this is something that goes very deep into like the mass psychology. Is that people are not as sophisticated as you think. It becomes like this kind of David Hume idea that your consciousness is like a bunch of sense impressions that are just colliding with each other and creating the experience of consciousness. And
and the result of that is that if someone tells you bad news, they're a bad person.
Yeah, they're a bad person, exactly. If you feel bad, or say like you have a headache when you meet someone, you're more likely to not like them because you have pain and you associate that pain with them. And of course, like, this sounds like it's, this is just stupid, right? This is people can't be this stupid.
I mean,
but
I don't want to,
right?
I don't want to derail this, but I think like Jen Psaki, right? She delivers the bad news, and then whenever the storms are blown over, the president comes out and sort of handles it, right? But he's never the one who brings the bad news.
No, exactly. That's it's a great observation. I love these. I mean, you could go all night and try to find like these creative ways that this principle is being applied here. But I mean, just to reinforce the point about the conditioning, the experiment of the Pavlov's dog, where you basically associate the idea of eating food with the sound of a bell, and then you can bring forth the salivation food response from the sound of the bell instead of the actual food. This is the idea that you can condition people to associate things with, associate really anything with anything. If these sense impressions are clustered together in time and space, and inside of your conscious experience, you will start to associate these things with each other. So that's something to sort of think about when you have if you have people in your life that you like or people you don't like, or you have literature that you like and literature you don't like, or hobbies and so on, to kind of ask yourself if the reason that you like this is because you had this introduced to you accompanying some more pleasant associations, or with people that you liked, or you just had a great day when you learned about go-karting or something.
Right.
and it's you're not really that particularly interested in the thing itself, but you associate it with a lot of positive memories.
Yeah.
I mean, for me,
that's the theory behind team building, but also sort of why it doesn't work, because it's it's mandatory fun.
Yeah, I mean, it can work if done correctly.
Yes.
For me with this association stuff, I mean, it's really like retro gaming, right? Or sitting and playing like these games that come on Steam that are like these 2D pixel art retro style games, which is something that I associate with happy times in my childhood. I mean, I don't imagine if I had a childhood
wearing the skin suit of
yes.
the games of the past. Yeah.
If I was associated, if I lived on a farm and I was maybe only reading books and I was not associated with any of these games, then I don't imagine that I would have picked up, retro games as a hobby, right? This is something that it just lives on pure association to like a simpler time, basically.
Yeah. The Jungian child in you is crying out for the teeth of the video game mother.
So, but of course, I think we could look at if you bring up the quote sheet again, and you go under liking, and then under similarity, and then there's a section under desegregation, because I thought that was interesting. It's something that he brings up in the book.
All right, I'll read it. On the basis of evidence that we are more favorable towards the things we have had contact with, some people have recommended a contact approach to improving race relations. Oh, I remember this part. They argue that simply by providing individuals of different ethnic backgrounds with more exposure to one another as equals, those individuals will naturally come to like each other better. However, when scientists have examined the school integration, the area offering the single best test of the contact approach, they have discovered quite the opposite pattern. School desegregation is more likely to increase prejudice between blacks and whites than to decrease it. Let's stay with the issue of school desegregation for a while. However well-intentioned the proponents of interracial harmony through simple contact, their approach is unlikely to bear fruit because the argument on which it is based is terribly misinformed. First of all, the school setting is no melting pot where children interact as readily with members of other ethnic groups as they do with their own. Years after formal school integration, there is little social integration. The students clot together ethnically, separating themselves for the most part from other groups. Second, if there were much more interethnic interaction, research shows that becoming familiar with something through repeated contact doesn't necessarily cause greater liking. In fact, continued exposure to a person or object under unpleasant conditions such as frustration, conflict, or competition leads to less liking, and the typical American classroom fosters precisely these unpleasant conditions.
Yeah, so this is it goes back to the idea of really conditioning, and that if you're kind of a midwit, right, like some of these people who write the legislation are, and you just think that, okay, we've learned that people being together, they're going to like each other, but this is not going to work if they're not having a good time. I mean, if they're having a bad time, if the school environment is complete shit, and you have like a standard thing where you put kids in school and you have like a multi-ethnic environment, it becomes like a prison, like a maximum security prison, and people just band together in gangs. You get like small, sort of gang warfare, isolation, and so on. And like, this is not going to make people less racist in a sense.
No.
It'll just make it worse, because they haven't really understood, like, why this is happening. So he does go through sort of suggestions of how this could have been done differently in the book, as to trying to sort of foster more cooperative
cooperation,
cooperation and team building things, instead of just putting people in the same place. But yeah, I think we've covered sort of enough on this. There's of course a lot of there's a lot of writings on this guy, Joe Girard, actually, something I should have mentioned, that is, the Guinness Book of World Records best car salesman, who I think he has the record for selling like 1,432 cars in a year or something.
Yeah,
I mean, it's quite something. That's like 5 cars a day, every day for a year. But I mean, he did a lot of these things in terms of understanding the liking angle, where he would just send people, gift cards with just writing, I like you a lot or something. I mean, that sounds creepy, right? But apparently people were maybe a little bit less aware of these strategies in the past. So I guess he was a bit of a pioneer with just, emphasizing the idea of just being liked over presenting a product. And so he got to fish with dynamite, but of course later the book was rewritten, and his approach was considered like, that's like the normal approach now. A salesperson is not trying to sell you the product; they're just trying to make you like them.
Yeah,
and they do it because it works. So I guess the sort of the pro tip here is that let's say if you are out somewhere, if you're trying to get a job or get into a club or something, and you're going through an interview process, you don't want to emphasize your qualifications. You want to make the people interviewing you like you. That should be your number one priority, always. Like, make them like you, and the rest will solve itself. Your actual competency is secondary to that.
And I mean, having done quite a bit of sort of vetting on the recruitment side for the company I work on, a lot of the times I just, I don't really care about their qualifications. Like 90% of the time when we're doing interviews and stuff, I just try to see, are these someone I like, just on an instinctual basis? Do I mesh well with this person? And if I don't, then 9 times out of 10, they're not a good fit.
But it matters, right? This is a kind of lived reality.
It does. And you can do corpo speak and say, yeah, it's because we're going to be working with this person, so I need to know that, this isn't going to be an issue. He's going to fit into the company culture.
The team, the culture round, or the team round.
Yeah.
You're not a good culture fit. Sorry, Bucko.
Exactly.
But it does matter, and of course, this gets a little bit skewed, like with the the policies around HR and affirmative action and so on, where they do end up cramming a lot of people who don't fit in companies in there because that's required by law. I mean, it doesn't make things better. I know you have a lot of people who will claim that. We'll show you some stats. It's like, oh yeah, companies with more diversity are gonna like have higher rates of return or something. I don't believe it, honestly. Like, my gut feeling is just so strong on that stuff, based on every experience that I've had working with companies, is that the homogenous, small, organized companies are productive, and the big mixed kind of mega structures are completely unproductive. It really falls in this kind of 80-20 rule, where 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and the cash flow already exists, so they don't really have to struggle or find creative ways to make money. It's just kind of just keep the wheels going, essentially.
Yeah.
The other sort of interesting part here is really the sort of the idea of eating as this kind of pleasant experience, is that just sitting down and eating with someone else will make you like them better. And especially if you do this over time, it's something that, instead of trying to focus on, what you should say in every individual moment to a person to make them like you, it's just, okay, are you spending time with them doing pleasant stuff?
Yeah,
that should be
in a pleasant environment.
That should be, what you're looking for. I mean, I'm even seeing this on, let's say, like people who go on dates, where I'll sit and watch, people who are on first dates, and you can just tell really quickly if it's going to go well or not, because if they're having fun, if they're doing something pleasant, it's likely to be like a return call. And if they're not, if they're falling into this kind of idea of just sitting and talking too much about themselves, or talking about, let's say you meet a woman and you start talking about your schizo ideas, right? Or
you got to lead with the...
I saw like one time a guy who was on a first date with a woman, and he was talking about his climate and anxiety, right? It's talking about how, we need to reduce consumption, and, we can't continue living like this. We need to downbuild society and so on.
To get her...
Yeah, she's going to get wet instantly,
wet,
right?
Yeah.
No, of course it's not. He's just talking about having, less stuff.
Now, what you need to do is you got to tell her how many babies you want. That's what you... and just getting real close and give her a good sniff. Just let her know that you really appreciate her pheromones.
Yeah, and don't shower because it interferes with your pheromones. No deodorant. Yeah. You want as many pheromones as possible.
Lead with the wooden doors. All right.
Hey, Paul.
I'm reminded of that edit of where someone has edited what's his name, Mel Gibson onto Joe Rogan, I think, or was Mel Gibson on Joe Rogan?
He was on Joe Rogan, actually.
But they have edited in sort of the wooden doors thing. It's really? Wooden doors? Yeah, wooden doors show. Jamie, pull that up.
Oh, that's great. All right, I think we've covered liking enough, so we could skip on to the next point, which is authority here. So we got the popular guy, Mr. Fauci, where, I mean, this one is, Cialdini spends a lot less time on authority than I think he should, because if you look at like modern government propaganda, I think, it leans very heavily on this angle. And of course, we have to look at, what's the heuristic here. The heuristic is that the person with the highest authority is right. Like, the person on top of the hierarchy is going to be correct. And you do not need to do the research. You don't need to actually look into what's being said. The person with the title or the uniform or the crown is right. And that's kind of what people are sort of relying on when making their decisions. So he will bring up examples of, say, if you have like a team of pilots, and, one of the junior pilots will find some mistake in the airplane, and will try to bring that up to let's say like the lead pilot, and the pilot will just ignore it, right? And the majority will side with the lead pilot. They will just, even though he's wrong, they will side with the chief, in a sense, because he has more authority, and not actually, want to do the work and so on. So I guess one of the more interesting examples is the Stanley Milgram experiments. Are you familiar with those?
That's the one, the electroshock things, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, for those not familiar, this is a kind of a type of compliance experiment where volunteers are brought in and they're just told that they're going to be a part of like this teaching experiment, and they're sitting in a type of lab, and they're looking through like there's said to be like a one-way mirror at a person who is trying to complete the task, and the person who's completing a task is a paid actor.
I thought the
right?
original was they can't see them; they can only hear them.
Oh, maybe that's
Well, it's details,
accurate,
really.
but
Yeah.
I'm not sure it changes the point that much. But let's
It's
say
some
that
level of separation. That's the point.
let's say they at least they observe on some level, right? They get some feedback from the person who's trying to do this task, and they're basically being told that if the person fails to do the task, they are going to give them an electroshock. And they're sitting with a button with the electroshock, and they're sitting with like a slider to increase the volume, the amount of watts that goes into this person. Of course, in reality, there's actually no real electricity being sent out. You just have an actor who's just pretending to be in pain. But the other thing about this experiment is that there's a supervisor right in the room who has like a doctor's coat and a sort of title card, who is said to be like a sort of an expert and authority. And so people will then start to electrocute this person when he's making mistakes, and then they're being asked by this authority figure to increase the amount of voltage.
And importantly, they're
yeah.
not actually electrocuting the person.
No, they're not electrocuting him, but at least in their perception, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And as they keep doing this, a lot of people will get squeamish, and they will say, "Well, I don't want to do this anymore. You see, like I'm really hurting this guy, right? And he might, they're being informed that he might die if you go above a certain voltage, which is available to them on the slider." But the authority figure will just insist. Basically, they're instructed to basically, if they say they don't want to do it, you just tell them, no, you have to do it. And they will repeat that for five times. And like the absolute majority of people who partook in this experiment, they were willing to give this subject enough voltage to kill him, basically. Because of the authority, as long as the authority told them that they are to just keep giving them,
just keep doing it,
just keep pushing the button, then they will keep pushing the button, even though they know, like they've been informed that this will kill the person, but they keep doing it anyway because they trust authority. So this says something about like how powerful this is, and I mean to the degree of like how low res this heuristic is. Cialdini basically says that typically how this is applied in like a sales and commercial setting is that you will have, say, a poster for like some type of headache pill or some painkiller or something, and then you'll have a doctor who will endorse it. And even if this doctor person is like House MD or something, or if it's like Rick Sanchez for Rick and Morty, like people will still trust it because there's a lab coat, or there's just like this. So it's reliant on like this very low res, simple heuristics and intuitions about who is actually in authority and how that can be applied. So the title will be one thing. Like say it's someone who's sort of a doctor, or you're a chairman. You could probably think of senior would be one thing. Like you're a senior accountant or a senior programmer. What do you call it? There's another title as well. The architect.
Executive.
I'm an executive. And credentials is another thing. I mean, if you have a diploma.
Credentialism, of course, is huge in our current incarnation of
exactly
of Western society. So that should be something that we're all familiar with.
I mean, of course, if we go back in time, the credentials and the authority would have been with the priest class. That's who would have actually had the authority through God. But now it's really the experts who are the authority figures, and they get it through the credentials and through the titles within the structure. So the titles, of course, the credentials, whether it's like diplomas that are put on the wall, you introduce yourself as having education, completed training. Uniforms is another thing, whether it's like the doctor's the doctor lab coat, police uniform, anything. I mean, all of that just it's this kind of very quick heuristic that people use to judge the appropriate role that you have in society and so on. And this is very hackable, right? You can just, anybody can put on a uniform I mean, it reminded me of this.
Yeah, and I talked about security and hacking earlier, but that's something that whenever you talk to security experts, especially people who do what they call physical security, which is literally just real world stuff, they're basically professional thieves, right? Um, Usually they will say that their most useful items are like, number one is like standard keys for various locks across something like America, right? Because usually you'll be able to get into like lock boxes and stuff. And the second is, an overall and a clipboard, and just sort of looking like you belong and you're
Yes.
supposed to be there.
I mean, there are videos of that on YouTube. People just like walking into restricted buildings and so on. And you could even do this by introducing yourself on the phone with a title, and that will immediately change the tone of the conversation. So it's super easy just to kind of hack that stuff. But of course, if you get caught, then that's a lot worse. I mean, it reminds me of all of these stolen valor videos that are floating around on YouTube. Have you seen any of them? These people who will just go to auctions and buy military
No.
uniforms
No.
in the United States, and like they buy military uniforms and they will walk around like they've never been in the military, but they'll just buy like uniforms and pins that look like they got medals, and they'll sit and talk about their military experience, and they'll be called out by people who will
I'm
just start
reminded
asking.
I mean, this is basically, I mean, it's not real because it's a movie, right? But the movies Fletch with Chevy Chase in them. I don't know if you watch those comedies from way back, I say from like the 80s, where that's basically what he does. He's like a private investigator, and he just has a bunch of like characters that he slips into to basically claim authority of various hijinks situations, right?
Yeah,
so just pretend to be a doctor to get into a hospital, right? Things like that.
It's a lot of fun.
And sort of wielding the authority and being indignant, right, when people question him.
Yeah, you just have to double down, right, and create like these urgent situations. That's another good way to, another good way to do like this double jab to get in with people when you're using these techniques is to create urgency, because you want people to use the heuristic and not actually use their brain to think about the situation. And the best way to get people to turn their brain off and just use the heuristic is to say that it's an urgent situation. Like they have to make the decision quickly, and then they're always going to go to the automatic program instead of doing the due diligence. I mean, of course, there's a point about trappings as well. Like there are certain, let's say you have like a nice suit, for instance, or certain ways about the way you act and dress and the way you talk and such that will communicate on more of a subliminal level that you have a certain authority, as well
like
as
a
body
lab
language
coat,
and so on.
or is that more?
No, I mean the
more
lab
uniform.
coat would be in the uniform with the trappings. Let's say you have like a suit or like a gold watch or something.
Okay, yeah,
like
I see what you mean. Yeah,
a certain trapping, or like you have good posture, for instance, or you speak with a certain tonality of voice
things.
and so on. So, okay, yeah, I think this is. I don't really have that much more to add on this. But of course, I mean, we are exposed to this every day, right? This
authority is
yeah.
another one of those where it's very easy to spot in everyday stuff. But again, it's important to realize when you're being influenced by it, just like the social proof.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to go to the last one then, which is scarcity. So, I mean, this is okay. What's the heuristic here? The idea is that if something is difficult to get, or if something is rare, then it's valuable, right? And it doesn't matter what it is. You don't have to do the thinking in terms of, okay, is this thing actually valuable? You just know that if it's in short supply, then it's more then it's better than if it's not, right? And this is the sort of thing that you can do. Let's say, I mean, if you're around children, for instance, if you make something more difficult for them to get to, they're more interested in it. You can see it like it's very simple on their kind of low res brains.
Exactly.
That the more the harder it is for them to get something, then the more they're going to want it. And it's just you're just watching the algorithm work, and it's so you can just have a little bit of fun with them, in terms of that. Let's say, I mean, in regular sales situations,
if you're holding like an adult candy, right? That they really want, and you have like a bunch of, they have like a fistful of like candy that they like, and you have like, say, an after eight, right? Chocolate and mint, which is usually something that kids don't like. And they really want the thing you have, right? Because they don't have it. They have this other stuff, but they have a lot of it, right? And they'll like bug you for it until they get it. And if you give it to them, they're going to hate it, and they're going to blame you for it, which is a weird like child thing.
I love it. I just love kids in this way, because like you can just see like the pure algorithm at work. There's just absolutely no reason why they would want these things other than the fact that it's scarce, and
it's scarce, and they don't have it
to mess with them. Let's see, in the regular sales situation, limited edition would be a thing that you see quite often, right? This is like limited edition Coke with lemon or something, and it's going off the shelf quickly, so you should get that. And this is also something that leads into a type of feedback loop, that when something is scarce, then people want it more. And when people want it more, they're gonna take it. So as you know, this is like with the toilet paper during the COVID lockdowns. Is that people thought that the toilet paper would be scarce, and because people thought it would be scarce, they get more of it, and then it actually becomes scarce, and then it just leads into a feedback loop until it's just empty.
And flour, right? And
and I see that as well, because like usually on Fridays I will go by like a grocery store from my way home to work, and I'll just get candy from the candy bar, and like you have various sorts of candy, and it's really easy to see that certain types of candies, they'll just empty out immediately, because like it seems like somebody wants it a little bit more, and they'll just take more of it, and then that leads other people to want it as well, because it's becoming scarce, and then it just
and it's social proof on top of it.
Yeah, so
a lot of these things play into each other. What would be fun? I'm not sure if we can do this because I don't quite remember the entire ordeal. But do you remember at the event, Academic Agent went through his like idea for how to boost the sales for McDonald's by retiring the Big Mac, and they go through all of these like influence points in that like 4-step plan or whatever it was.
Yeah, that was great. That was really funny.
Sorry,
but
continue.
Yeah, he would use then, try to make the Big Mac scarce, and then
you make it scarce. You make it a social sort of thing. You make people you like poke their consistency thing by like making people like the Big Mac more than the new burger, right? And then sort of calling their bluff when you bring it back. All of these things.
Yep. I mean, high pressure sales as well they're going to be using this kind of scarcity stuff. That's like you have to make a decision now, and that's when the urgency comes in as well. Like, I mean, if you don't make a decision now, then it's gone, right? You can't. And this is the sort of thing that I've dealt with on the phone. But I was talking about like this course of when I was just buying a course, right, from a guy on the phone, and he basically said that like this deal is like take it or leave it. If you don't take it now, then the offer is off the table. But there's no scarcity here. Like the marginal cost of an extra participant on a digital course, on like a digital platform, it's nothing. Like it doesn't cost anything to add an extra person. And right. But they know that in terms of just getting the sale, the likelihood that you're actually going to sign in and commit and get this is that if you can introduce like a sort of urgency and a kind of hyper scarcity about it, even though it doesn't make sense for the product, you're still much more likely to get the person to sign on the dotted line.
Yeah.
Let's say, I mean, another principle here is,
I think he says that as well in the book, that just writing or having a sign that says sale, regardless of whether or not you're having a sale, increases purchases, increases traffic.
Yeah, I think I remember that. And another part of scarcity is also the idea of loss aversion, right? Which is the idea that your people are more afraid of losing what they have than they are of not, or sort of missing out on what they could gain. And like he grounds this in sort of evolutionary psychology, where people will just live on this kind of existence, poverty minimum, where if you go below like the minimum that people are living on, that like that's kind of a life and death situation, whereas the it's not as critical to try to increase what you have, because I mean you have like just enough to subsist on. But the influencing angle then from loss aversion is to really always try to frame things in terms of loss and not in terms of gain. So he brings up the example with an acquaintance that he had that was like sort of a divorce lawyer that was always in the process of trying to negotiate divorce settlements for people. And a trick that this divorce lawyer ended up using to try to get these deals to come through and not fall through the cracks at the last minute was to frame things this way. It's that you come to the person and say, you have a deal, you just need to sign here, right? And saying that, and that sounds trivial, but it's in saying that you have the deal, you're framing it in such a way that it's something you have already, like, and you're going to lose the deal if you're not signing. So there's like this kind of subconscious, instead of saying that we can get this deal for you if you sign here, then that means that, okay, that's something that you're getting. But if it's something that you already have and that you're losing, then that increases sort of the urgency and the willingness to act, in a sense.
Yeah. Buy it now. Yeah.
Right here, right now. Yeah, you have
right
to.
now.
So yeah, no, I actually think we got through the entire. I think we got through the entire stack. I think we're a little bit quicker on this than I expected, honestly.
Yeah,
maybe we can take some chats or something.
As we talked about a bit, like these, I think we talked about this in the pre-lobby, that these, this especially influence and these concepts aren't necessarily very difficult concepts, but they are very important. And they are something that Cialdini has spent a lot of time experimenting with and researching to have sort of the basis to be able to say this. So it's not just, someone like Harari or Harris will sometimes seem to pull things out of their ass and just sort of try to sound smart, but Cialdini is very often referring to studies, however hard they might be to reproduce. He's at least tried to do the legwork. So there's reason to believe that a lot of these things function, at least to a certain extent, in this way.
And you can see it. I mean, when you've seen this presentation now, you could go out and just start looking at various situations that happen in real life, and you very quickly notice how these techniques are being used. In terms of advertising would be the easiest one, but you can look at, say, politics on television or business situations and so on, how these techniques always come in some form or another. Like, and it's not necessarily from the point of view that people have read this book and then they're trying to apply it. I mean, people who are, say, naturally good at influencing other people, they sort of naturally fall to some of these tactics, whether it be, let's say, like you are a person who's very social. What do you call, like, this sort of social butterfly, that you're going to be doing a lot of these positive association liking strategies naturally, and through that they're going to gain social capital. Or someone who's kind of like a high pressure salesperson, they're going to understand that you need to focus on the loss, focus on scarcity and authority and pressure and so on, and get people to act that way.
Exactly. So these are things you can notice. These are things you can learn from. And as I mentioned when we talked about the social proof stuff, I mentioned me talking to a person and mentioning, my friend group. I was doing a social proof thing without really thinking that's what I was doing. Right? I knew that I was doing it for a reason, but I wasn't aware that I was doing this explicitly. Right?
No, certainly. So a lot of this, like, I mean, just like the heuristics are hard coded into the human being, so are operating against the heuristics. Like, there's a lot of things that you want to understand at a gut level, but there is, in terms of being like a quote unquote smooth operator, like you really have to elevate it a little bit in terms of trying to think about consciously, how am I applying myself here? When you try to solve problems or you try to get stuff, right? Because, I mean, if you live a life where you're not able to influence other people, it's a very miserable life. It's a very, very miserable life. So I think there's a sort of correlation there between, like, your satisfaction of how you feel in the day-to-day and your ability to actually influence other people's actions.
Well, and it does sound sinister, but I mean, a large part of the human experience is, negotiating with people about getting your way, right? Sort of talking people into doing something you want them to do, or vice versa, right? So
Yeah, the option is then that you're just on the other side of this, right? You're doing something that other people want you to do, and that's constantly it. You keep just sort of falling into the same traps in a sense, and there's no personal power to that.
no. So I'll just highlight this again in case I saw someone was asking about the books. It's Influence and Persuasion are the names of the book.
I mean, the content of the book, of course, if you just want to go through like these principles, it's actually very quick in terms of just explaining what they are and how they work. But the most of the meat of the book is him going through studies and situations of how they are, how they are used. And of course, we could go all day. We could have like an 8-hour stream just going through all of these different cases of how they actually function in real life. But again, that's not. We didn't want this to just be like this kind of reading
No,
quotes.
what's interesting is that the version you have here, I think he's done like another revised version, and in that one, which is the one you sent me, he has people who have written to him after he published the book with their stories, and he uses those to sort of embellish his explanations, which I think is very interesting.
Yes, because the original, I think it came out in the 1982 or 1984, and he keeps revising the book over and over again, both in terms of, like you said, with the audience feedback, where people are writing to him about how they sort of employed these methods in their life and had success, and if there are new technologies and new situations, politically and so on that are happening, he just keeps implicating them.
I was surprised at the span of time he is able to draw on examples. He'll do, he'll mention Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump in the same passage, right? When he's making an example.
Yes.
So it doesn't feel like he's stuck in.
Yeah, that's of course a problem. Like with these books, you have to go through and update them, because if this was, if it just remained in the 80s, right, it would be almost unapproachable for a Zoomer, for instance, to read this, because they, first of all, they don't know who half of the people are in terms of the celebrities that are being referred to. And like, the 80s was just like a different planet. You didn't have the computer technology and the memes and stuff. It's there was a lot more of this face-to-face stuff that people were using, like this, the boomer strategies. So it would have been like I said, kind of unapproachable, but because he has, if you're buying it, you're getting the last edition of it. And the ones that we were reading is the PDF, right? Because I sold my original copy of this, but you could get the PDF of the 1980s version online.
And there's also online, you sent me a YouTube link as well to the audiobook version, which I think he narrates himself. I think he's a bit slow. I listened to it at like 125 or one half speed.
That's why you have the YouTube speed up feature. Like, it's just been sort of a common thing. That's how you consume YouTube now. I
don't usually do that, but he spoke very slow, and I'm saying that as someone who published like a 30-minute video explaining something that I probably could have cut down to like 15. But
I was going at 2x speed on that, right? Because I had to get through like 11 hours of stuff. So I'm not doing that at the regular speed. I just don't have the patience for that kind of stuff. Which sounds weird, because I participate in these streams where I do streams that are like 3 hours, but I never watch 3-hour streams.
That's the modern mind right there.
I will do it at like 2x speed or something, right? Or I will watch some kind of chopped up version of it, but it's very unusual for me that I will watch. Big salute to the people in the chat who are actually staying for like the whole thing, because I don't think I can do it.
We appreciate all of you, of course. Subscribe and like the video. That really helps us out. Now I have highlighted some comments and questions that came in here, so we'll pull this up. This first one, of course, Nietzsche's horse says, have any of these techniques been used by Global Homo towards us chuds? Well, I would retort by asking, where have you been for the last 2 years? That was a very prominent example, but of course it happens all the time.
Yep, every day,
I mentioned,
all day.
And not necessarily insidiously or on purpose either. I just mentioned, you'll have the press secretary deliver the bad news and the president will deliver the solution, right? That's not necessarily something that is a value judgment. That's just how it works because they've realized that, otherwise the president will be hated.
Yeah, I mean, with the reciprocity, the student loan would be like the newest, example of that.
Exactly.
Where student loan forgives. I'm just giving you free money. Now vote for me, right? You owe me
Right.
that now. I have power over you because I gave you this stuff. So,
and as I showed with some of the images from that Twitter account, there's people still reminiscing about the time when Trump gave them money, right? Jato72 says, I missed the Sweden election part of the stream. Is Sweden saved? Well, we're not quite sure, I suppose, is the
yeah, it's all there. Good now. We were like really blackpilled for 20 years, but democracy came through for us, and people awoke finally. We had the great awakening by posting enough memes and stuff on the net. It worked. So Sweden is saved now. We can all go home, go back to the grill.
Yes.
That's my summary.
Following up here saying, I was fishing for a especially covert case. Do we have any very covert cases where this is being done?
I think a lot of the examples that we have done are covert. How covert
can
does
you
it have
do
to
these
be?
things on such a large scale and have it not be covert? Like I'm not sure if it scales covertly.
I mean, I'm wondering if he means like that it's very visible that the person doing it has read this particular book and it's like, now I'm going to use like this exact technique.
Well, okay, let's take the example of the recent Biden speech with the whole like song and dance and the color coding that was draped in, right? That is not a coercive way of getting you to sort of like tell you that Biden is being serious now, right? He's basically declaring war on what did he call them, the MAGA Republicans?
Yes, there's what is that, semi-fascist or something?
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, this is a bit more whip than carrot in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of.
I mean, like say, okay, we went through the reciprocity where people are just, say like bribing politicians, bribing people in business and so on. This happens, all the time. Where people just
but that's on a more sort of person or like a lower amount of people. I'm thinking, I don't think you can do this covertly and do it towards a population, right? I mean, you can do it.
What about welfare?
One person
what about
to
like
another, or one organization to another. But then
well,
you're just describing oligarchy,
look
right?
Look up the example. If you go to the quote sheet there's a quote that's under reciprocity and it's under Ethiopian foreign aid. I think that's if you want to an example of how that applies on a kind of larger scale.
All right, I'll bring that up. I know of no better illustration of how reciprocal obligations can reach long and powerfully into the future than the perplexing story of $5,000 of relief aid that was sent in 1985 between Mexico and the impoverished people of Ethiopia. In 1985, Ethiopia could justly lay claim to the greatest suffering and privation in the world. Its economy was in ruin. Its food supply had been ravaged by years of drought and internal war. Its inhabitants were dying by the thousands from disease and starvation. Under these circumstances, I would not have been surprised to learn of a $5,000 relief donation from Mexico to that wrenchingly needy country. I remember my chin hitting my chest, though, when a brief newspaper item I was reading insisted that the aid had gone in the opposite direction. Native officials of the Ethiopian Red Cross had decided to send the money to help the victims of that year's earthquakes in Mexico City. It is both a personal bane and a professional blessing that whenever I am confused by some aspect of human behavior, I feel driven to investigate further. In this instance, I was able to track down a fuller account of the story. Fortunately, a journalist who had been as bewildered as I was by the Ethiopians' action had asked for an explanation. The answer he received offers eloquent validation of the reciprocity rule. Despite the enormous needs prevailing in Ethiopia, the money was being sent because Mexico had sent aid to Ethiopia in 1935, when it was invaded by Italy. So informed, I remained awed, but I was no longer puzzled. The need to reciprocate had transcended great cultural differences, long distances, acute famine, and immediate self-interest. Quite simply, half a century later, against all countervailing forces, obligation triumphed.
I don't know if that was a kind of covert example, but I think it's an example that's kind of transcends like the sort of regular person to person, sales
Sure, yeah.
psychology example. I mean, if you look at foreign relations, I mean, what is it? If it's not pushing people with guns, then
Well,
it's
I
like
have,
gifting people, right?
yeah, something that's more covert would be, I think he uses this example, is the Cuban Missile Crisis. The idea that, it was being, the deal of removing the missiles from Cuba required the U.S. to take away a lot of their missile bases or silos in a lot of in the Europe
Yeah,
continent, right?
yeah, I remember that now. I don't remember.
And that was something that was hidden for quite a long time. It was believed that the U.S. just won because they were awesome, right?
Yeah, that's
Until
this kind
the
of hyper real politics, right? That's being peddled inside of the U.S., where you just show up with you just tear your shirt off and do the Macho Man Randy Savage thing, and we just scared the Soviets because we're so awesome. But in reality, it was actually a kind of deal that they broke, where you do something for me, then I do something for you, right? I mean, like with the hyper realism stuff, like Ronald Reagan said, what's that quote? We don't negotiate with terrorists. But I mean, if you've looked at
exactly,
foreign policy, this is bullshit because they do it all the time. They
yeah,
constantly negotiate with terrorists and have to use, these types of principles to get what they want in these kind of foreign policy situations and war situations. I mean, most of the stuff that's happening, it's not done by bullets and money or at least by sort of money pressure. It's by these kind of like softer approaches.
exactly. Um, Nietzsche's horse also mentions immigration. Yes, there's sort of like, the pro-immigration politician has sort of a reciprocity deal with the immigrant to keep voting and keep getting, benefits.
Yeah, what's that? That's actually a perfect case. I remember some Canadian talking about his immigrant mother who was always voting for Justin Trudeau, right? Even though she was very conservative. Yeah, she was sort of a conservative Muslim woman, but she felt indebted to Justin Trudeau for protecting like their group in Canada. So that's very much in
Right.
the reciprocity
Yeah.
thing.
And here you see that extending, Justin Trudeau probably never met this woman, right? Or was even aware that she existed. But because he helped someone of her people, that extends to, that reciprocity sort of goes tenfold back to him. Can I say this out loud? Are we going to get banned if I say naughty words? Phallus Facification says, is it possible to sufficiently evade state supervision and censorship in today's world to create the embryo of a tightly organized political party a la Lenin's Bolsheviks ready to pounce? Yes, it is possible. And there are a lot of people spending a lot of time thinking about this. And I do subscribe, I suppose, more and more to Mr. Green River's approach to this, that you don't create a political force, you create a social force. And then once it is mature enough, it becomes political. What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100%, actually. I mean, because you have to realize that even though there was surveillance in the past, the surveillance capacities was just not the same as they are now, right? They just have so much data on people, and they're a lot easier to track. So some things remain the same, but certain things have changed. So it needs to, like you said, much more focus on social stuff, really, and trying to just create some support and infrastructure that can exist a little bit on the side of the system. And then maybe in the future, if the situation allows for, that can come to prominence and actually, pounce, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight this from Jato72, social traps, which is why I want to live in a cabin in the woods. I think he was referring to, us talking about how this is part of everyday life. And I can certainly relate to that, the masculine urge to just, go into the woods and never be heard from again. but I think we have to unfortunately face the reality that we do live in a society, and as much as it pains me, I would like to continue living in a society, but I would like it to be more sustainable and more sacred than the one we currently live in.
I mean, there is something that's sort of innately feminine and gay about all this soft power. It's exhausting, actually, the
Yeah.
amount of situations that this is being used in. It's just way too much, to be honest. But they won't leave you alone, no matter how hard you wish. So
No, it's a
that's
feature
just
of
facts.
the type of society we live in, and until we change the makeup of that, it's not going to give you any chance to really, run off, if that's what you want to do. All right, 2.5 hours. Do we want to stick around for any longer, or do we just want to?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I wanted to look at some of these polls that you've been posting lately.
Oh yeah,
Maybe we
can
can
bring
get
up
some audience interaction there in terms of if there was somebody who
voted.
who voted or maybe haven't voted and so on. So let's see. First, we did the the director poll. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see here. Oh, I can't see the.
Oh, you have to vote.
I'm not
then,
logged in. Okay, hang on. So I can bring up the. Oh, I opened like a private window. That's what happened. And let me just share. Here we go. And we can see the. I'll just take a screenshot.
Maybe you can zoom in a little bit then.
Yeah, I'm going to take a screenshot and then just zoom in on that, I think. Let's see, share screen, window. Here we go. That's easier. So the Longhouse Kids topic poll was pretty much a set of potential topics that had a children's focus, I suppose. But children's media, I guess. Now, Aeon Fluxus, that's been a long time since I've seen that. But
yeah,
I know a lot of people in the comments were like, Aeon Flux, and I seem to remember that was pretty good. So it's something I'm personally interested in. And I have a feeling we're going to end up doing a lot of these. This was just more to gauge the audience mood, and then probably go in the opposite direction.
We have to stare down our own base.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was just interested in getting some engagement on seeing what people are actually interested in here, and just as a sort of proportion. I didn't expect the Disney thing to be that dominant, but I assume, as somebody mentioned in the comments, that this is because we have maybe a majority of Zoomers.
Yeah, you're all Zoomers. And I see that in the analytics as well. There are some outliers, obviously. Yeah, I knew every time you make a statement on the internet, like some guy in the comments is going to be like, not me. I'm not that.
Well,
I'm not
if you were Gen X, which one did you vote for? I hope it was like the other Gargoyles or Aeon Flux in that case, because you would have been in like prime age to actually appreciate those shows.
All right. And then the other one we did was which Nordic director you would like to see a Longhouse episode on. And then pretty obviously, I was assuming that Von Trier would win just on name recognition.
Yes.
But someone also named Lasse Hallström, which I think was a good, which wasn't on the poll, but it was an interesting vote actually, which we might look into.
Yes, I mean, with this one, we could have just called it like Danish directors, but
sure, but Hallström also did a lot of the ABBA music videos, which I find interesting. Not that it might be like super deep, but it's just it's culture.
Yes, so the Trier episode has to come in the future, right? I mean, he is like one of these really interesting kind of author film directors.
Yes.
We might even have to do multiple episodes on him because he's got quite a broad catalog. And I mean, some of his stuff is vulgar, like it's really vulgar as well. So I don't know how your stomach is, Walrus, for discussing some of those films.
I will do my best. Let's put it that way. But we're gonna have to spend some time to, some of these movies I might have seen and some of these I haven't, and regardless, I'm probably have to, watch everything we're going to talk about to a certain extent. I know that Trier has some of these, what's it called, like Antichrist. Is that one of the more vulgar ones?
It depends on your tastes, but like for my taste, I think Antichrist was probably one of his most difficult movies for me to watch. I like it. It did tap into one of my fears, actually, about like female irrationality.
Right.
Which I feel like it just encapsulates perfectly. He knows kind of what buttons to push, but that one's pretty vulgar. But he's released like Nymphomaniac is really difficult to watch.
Yeah, that's one too. Yeah.
The house that Jack built. I mean, I didn't have a hard time with it, but I know that a lot of people had very tough time watching that film because of some of the murder scenes and so on.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen that one. Is that a more recent one? Yeah, that's 2018.
It's very recent. Dogville is I mean, it's not vulgar, but it's difficult to watch. So yeah, I can't remember his entire catalog.
Do we have to watch Clown? He's apparently written an episode in Clown.
I don't know. It seems like the Danes are kicking our asses in, at least with film directing.
Oh, and they have for a long time. Yeah.
I don't know why. Like they can't really do metal or anything like that. But they in this area, it's just like a clean table.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Maybe they've gotten more government gibs to develop a proper movie industry. I don't know.
You'd think so, but it seems like there's a lot of gibs in Norway as well on the cultural sector, and it doesn't seem to lead to anything good.
What the Danes are better at doing, it seems, is like they're, people like Lars von Trier, people who can, on an artistic side, sort of make movies. They generally make better products than we do. The success we've had, say success, is that we've sort of matured the movie industry to now sort of just produce knockoff American blockbusters,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's still, we could say, that's impressive for Norway, but that's kind of all it is. It doesn't really have any value to stand on its own feet, especially when you put it in front of an international audience. And exactly. I don't know why this is so hard to produce a film that would be internationally interesting, but they just can't seem to do it. Maybe we should have like a stream where we go through some of these like 70s Norwegian films. That would be pretty funny. It would just be like this.
Some of those are very dark and the sort of like everything sucks and we're all gonna die and people are awful, but they're also very boring. It's the downside. They're just very boring to watch.
It was that was the 70s. Basically, it was very depressing time, even though I wasn't alive then. But you could see the culture that was produced there, even though it has like a kind of bittersweet.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it reflects in Sweden, it reflects in Britain, and it reflects in American culture. Everything about the 70s is apparently just the worst, right?
Yeah. But you have some of these like Norwegian movies that are so melodramatic. It's like they go into so bad it's good territory. Like this films, some of these like sci-fis that they've written and so on. I mean, it's just like a fun thing to do. I don't know if I've seen any other like YouTube channels try to do that. So maybe we should be first.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, as far as like
we'll do something with these things.
Yeah.
But I do also want to do actually the Disney movies targeting girls, because you sent me a couple of messages about this, and this is a bigger topic than I realized.
Yeah, so a lot of these, I mean, I did suggest things on this on this list where sometimes I'll just get these intuitions about stuff that's happened in culture through just getting a few data points, and I kind of want to see if I can actually verify what my gut feeling on these things. but like with the Disney movies, there seems to have been sort of a shift, because I remember in the 90s you had like the standard Disney princess archetype, that is the kind of like you can have a little bit of girl power and be independent and so on, but you're still ultimately going to anchor down with the alpha Chad. Whereas it seems like the some of the stuff that's more targeted to the consumers now, it's just like this complete enveloped estrogen navel gazing style of film, where it's like women is basically everything, right? It's just all estrogen. Everything is about like the female inner life, and men are just kind of like this window dressing thing that's just in the background to look good, in a sense. They have no like actual role. I mean, especially watching stuff like Encanto and Turning Red and some of these newer films. That's just the impression that I get, is that
I haven't watched any of those. I don't have any children yet, and I don't have any siblings or anything that are young enough to have watched those.
We're both married, right? You have to make certain concessions, and I mean, if you watched all of Full Metal Alchemist and something, I mean, I had to make certain concessions as well. And I try I try to just make it.
My wife, dragged me through. What's the name? The one with the rock, where he plays like a Maori god.
The Maura or something. Oh damn, I don't remember.
Moana is the name of it. Yeah.
Which, that's also
it was a movie.
It was a movie. it looked pretty. So
yeah. He also made me watch Shape of Water, and I ruined it for her, because that is probably the most subversive movie I've ever seen in recent memory. Holy crap, that is one subversive movie.
Yeah.
Every single... can I Fed post about this? I'm not sure if I can. But it's, I did go in with sort of my feelers out, or my hedgehog spikes primed, but I was proved right about everything. And she was like, wow, this was more subversive than I remember, but it's a very beautiful movie, and I'll give it that. Visually it's interesting.
Yeah, and not everything that Guillermo del Toro has made is subversive in this way. So I mean, you could have been easily tricked in that sense. There's no reason that this had to be as subversive as it was, but he seemed to have conceded a little bit to the wokesters.
If it keeps going, I guess I have to get I have to get the bell. To do
the dinger and stuff.
Yeah.
But what I like to do is to watch like E. Michael Jones reviewing movies. It's like some of the funniest stuff. Like he has
to review movies
on Odyssey or BitChute, where he reviews like Shape of Water. And
I did not know he reviewed movies.
He does. It's absolutely hilarious. I mean, there's like, I don't agree with anything he says, but there is this. It is in this kind of sphere of entertainment. I think it's a little bit similar to BAP, even though they have differences in viewpoints and so on. That these kind of like very fringe right-wing characters that are actually quite intellectual, but they also have like very bizarre viewpoints that are so like far outside of the open window that it becomes like a sort of strange type of entertainment just to watch them.
Yeah. All right. I think on that note, we should probably log off for the night. I'm not quite sure what's on the ticket next week. Depending on, we might have to do sort of like a current events thing, or I'll have time to scrape together a research into this early computer hacking phone. They call it something like phone junkies or something. Computer anarchist movement, and some of these guys who, surprisingly to me, as I've read their, especially been fascinated by Ted Nelson, who wrote his own like homemade book basically, because he'll be very kind of like Harari. He'll be very correct in his analysis that we're about to do something wrong, but the solution is to create computer utopia. That's the way to go. Plug everyone into the matrix, right? So we'll see how far I get on that, if I feel confident that I can talk for a long enough time. And the week after that should be the 29th, and we're doing Hyperborea stream. Burkhardt and Leo strong-armed me into doing a Hyperborea stream, and he messaged me, like he spent like an hour talking to me last night in DMs about Hyperborea, because I started doing some research on it, and I was like, this is just like, I told him, what is this? This seems like some sort of what's the religion? Man, Hubbard.
Scientology?
Yeah, this seems like some weird Scientology stuff. And he's like, no, you're doing it all wrong. And then, an hour of like geology, and because I'm a complete layman on this, I have no idea what this is about. So he's in the process of red pilling me on Hyperborea. So that's going to be very fun.
Yeah, I'm already excited. I mean, I've seen him in the Element chat mentioning it. I didn't know that they were this serious about it, but yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, and he's doing it in a proper way as well. I mean, it's not going to be Fed posting and as I said, Scientology stuff. It's the real stuff. And Burkhardt is going to talk about the Finland Chinese hyper war or whatever it's called. There's going to be some memes, obviously. The Fenno-Korean hyper war or something. Yeah. It'll be fun times. All right. I think Prudentialist and Geo is talking about the post 9/11 world. So go check them out. I'll post the link in the description. Tell them hello from me. And by that, I think we'll leave you for tonight. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, comment if you want to. It really helps us out. And we'll see you next week.